Hello.
Good morning. Who am I speaking to? Or
Jana
who just,
Borna.
hi, Jana. This is Peggy. Are you the one
Hey,
that's
Peggy.
presenting on behalf of the Department of Justice this morning?
Mel and I.
You and Mel are going to be doing the CARES Act presentation. Okay. And then for Legislative Council, is it Kristen or is it Dana? You know?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. I'm just asking. I was asked to facilitate this meeting, so just trying to get, an idea of who's presenting and stuff.
Yes.
Okay.
I think it's going
Well,
to be,
good morning.
it's probably going to be,
Good morning, everybody. This is Peggy Nakai. I'm facilitating the meeting today with the NABI committee. So we are waiting for Speaker Damon and more delegates or other delegates to call in.
Peggy, this is Jana. Can you hear me?
Yes, Jenna. Good morning.
Some of my people are, good morning, are sending an email saying that
Hi,
when
good
they
morning,
call in, they're
everyone. This
getting-
is Melinda Arbizo Siaco from the Office of the Speaker. Thank you for calling in. We'll just be a few minutes here, so we're just waiting for everyone to call in. Thank you.
Peggy, as I was saying, one of my attorneys is saying that they're getting a message, a voice recorded error message saying that they cannot join the meeting because it is locked.
Yeah, I think it's because the speaker's office is on this new system. It's WebEx.
Hi, good morning.
And so
Yes,
so
we
that they don't
were
get
unable to
unauthorized-
lock the meeting.
Excuse me?
Hi, we were able to unlock the meeting, so if you
Who
can
is
let people
talking?
know that they can call in.
Okay,
Who am
thank
I
you.
speaking to? I'm not sure who that was, Jana. Was it?
I'm not sure
Anyway,
who that
I
was
guess-
either.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Melinda from the Office of the Speaker. I just wanted to mention that the meeting is not locked, so people can call in.
Thank you, Melinda. This is Peggy. I'll be facilitating the meeting for NABI today. I'm the assigned advisor. So I appreciate that message. Okay, so
Good morning.
Jana,
This
do
is
they get on now?
Truddy on the call. Thank you.
Good morning, Shadeja. This is Peggy. I'm the assigned
Oh, yeah, it's
advisor today. Oh, yeah, I've been beautiful morning out there.
It is. My corn is growing, so I'm excited.
That's really good. You did good on getting your garden in. I haven't got that far yet. Hello?
Hello, Delegate Stewart's on the line.
This is Kristen Lowell at OLC. Good morning, Kristen. This is Peggy.
Hey, Peggy.
We're waiting for other delegates to call in, and Speaker Damon is going to be calling in. Thank you.
Okay.
Sure.
Hello?
Good morning. This is Representative Orlando.
Oh, good morning. This is Dana Bobroff. Are you the only one on the call this morning?
No, I'm with you, Dana. How are you doing?
Oh, yes, your team. Okay, great. Things will just start in a few, I'm sure. I'm glad you're doing.
How are you holding
Good
up,
morning,
Dana?
everyone.
Oh, good
It's
morning.
crazy, but Okay. All right.
That's good.
Great.
Yate.
Yeah,
Good morning,
everyone.
On the line. Good
Good
morning,
morning.
Delegate
Okay,
Stewart on the
we're-
line.
This is Delegate Brown.
Okay,
Morning,
great.
Delegate.
We're getting more delegates calling in then. If you will all remember to mute your phone so that we don't have a lot of background noise, that'd be great. Thank you. This is Peggy Nakai. I'm going to be the advisor to this meeting, so I'm just waiting for Speaker Damon and other delegates to call in. Thank you.
Morning, everybody. This is Pernell Halona.
Good morning, Mr. Halona.
Good morning, Peggy. I'm on the line. This is Delegate So.
Okay, good morning, Shiaz. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's caught me off guard, and I'm on my little morning run, but I'll listen. I'm going to put myself on mute. How was she?
All righty. We're still waiting for other delegates to call in.
Good morning, Yate. This is Delegate Rick Nez here, calling in. Thank you. I'm going to go on mute now.
Good morning. This is Delegate Charlene. So,
Good morning.
Delegate Freeland here. Good morning.
Oh, good morning.
That's
Yep, Lisa Espio.
If you can just print it, your site, get up there. Great then. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Bye-bye. Keyboard. Do you have your Wells Fargo login information? Do you have the Wells Fargo login information? No?
Oh.
I think I can find it under Linda's. If you don't have.
Hi, good morning. This is Delegate Crotty. So this is a work session. Do we know when we're going to begin? We're also being streamed online. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. This is Speaker Damon. Thank you for everyone calling in. Thank you to everybody listening in on the World Wide Web, to my colleagues, the 24th Council. We will be beginning in about 4 minutes at 9:20 a.m. If you would just hold on, there's a couple of technical initiatives or difficulties that we're having here. We're trying to address those, so we're putting that together. So we will be beginning this at 9:20 a.m. Good morning, Peggy. Are you on?
Good morning, Speaker. Yes, I am.
Okay, great.
So we're all set. I believe the Department of Justice has called in. Jana and Mel are there, and then Office of Legislative Counsel Dana is here as well. So the presenters are here.
Great.
Hello?
Yes, good morning, everyone. Again, this is Speaker Damon. We will be beginning in about 2 minutes at 9:20 a.m. Sorry for the delay. We are having a little bit of technical difficulties, but we will be beginning in about 2 more minutes. Again, this is a call in is for Naabik'íyáti Committee of the 24th Council, and it is a work session via telecommunication. So colleagues, anybody on the line, if you would hold on, and then we can go ahead and continue moving forward. We're just finalizing everything, making sure we have all the recorders up, everybody ready to go. Good morning, everyone. Again, this is Speaker Damon here in Window Rock, Arizona. I have Ms. Peggy Naka assigned to help assist as the assigned advisor today for Naabik'íyáti Committee. Peggy, are you on?
Yes, Speaker, I am. Good morning,
Great.
everyone.
Good morning. Honorable Otto, are you on? I just now got a text message saying that the meeting is locked. Are you on?
I'm on the line. I'm on the line, Speaker.
Oh, great. On calling our staff, can you make sure that the meeting is unlocked right now? Just so I know sometimes it does get locked up. We're ready to go. You can go ahead and start that. Let's go ahead and get this started here this morning. Everyone that's listening in on the World Wide Web, welcome to the Naabik'íyáti Committee of the 24th Navajo Nation Council. Today we are having a work session via telecommunications. I'm here in Window Rock, Arizona on the Navajo Nation. Today is Thursday, May 21st. The time now is 9:21 a.m. We will be having a couple of presenters here today. Let me go over let me have Peggy go to the proposed agenda here, so we can go ahead and get things readily available. I will be presiding. Again, my name is Seth Damon, Speaker of the 24th Navajo Nation Council. We did call the meeting to order, the invocation. Let me go on down before we do anything further. Let me go ahead and have Honorable Otto So do the invocation this morning. Honorable Otto So.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to provide the invocation this morning. I don't understand the idea. It's not signed out that is it's not signed again. But also now son him just not in his heart. He's shaking huh. A pen be a chair. It's a car in Hojonga. I did. I don't. There's a pair. I know the need egg of it's a car. Okay. I did need Plato. None said class A. It's a car John that is good. This shaking huh. In the car there. This and leaning the yard egg huh. The car. That's the go back in the ship. None said leaning. In the hot nado. It's a Hojonga country's card. Ego tanete. He the con. It is a car in a Tana Hassan hima. A lash like in a Grego. Call it off. I drop back with Yay could not a yet be seen up a Yay. I drop back with Yay could not have can't this cat cake. This shake a con. I can't using it egg on the cat and be lash like in leaning home. A jaw. The 20 Lord or less or jaw. Because in 8 of our head yard only. Heart issue could up in the high could up. Or skis and zig could up. I don't like each stand the back. But an instant or less or yard had a ego. Now I'll take or less or dot egg on that I'll take only. I don't call the shake you come. The whole car you have hit ego. The hickey hold jish. Now San has in so under concept within the house jish. So now just any shake call me cow and that's so. But Joe, open. I don't find Lenny could open Hajin, but I didn't actually Lenny does your bike could off. No car never and snake or home. Crying check, sit the honey. A sweet of sunny. I don't but tired. No safety. Just cage. I shouldn't wait. I think so bad, but then that is it go home. What I've been ito. I think so now. I think so net na is la ina. I go about nothing. Oh, I do about a gate. Could be eight now, son him. This train could on. This just a guy. This don't fish. It's so. This fish. Could all be. Could be. Not Nico. Call the Nashin Hansni, his agent, the also. Mr. in the car and his arch. The car get the never care for car get the sergeant. So this go sleep, band happy. Never car necke in Kodo. Baby Arjabin continually. His agent that off, listen, Zagon that off, listen, Sonny, the com at Ishinashni Lane. Jonah in his heart. I sent our Kodo. Later, I sent so when I get there. I don't think that Heinla. I'm not in I think this shake call by now. He called the Naye Lini. So it's in Connie times me. I did ever the Kodo. Kodon cannot eat less. They in Lini, but he less. And as a joy, kid at the door, can't go. The door, you kid at the door, can't go yet at the door, can't. I don't have enough. They could all lay. As they are, not a hot old little cut. And not it, ne. As you know, cat can't eat or live niche. As I know, okay, that harder than a next time of stealer. I hope, Oshia, oh, you wait, then the agent, then the game, the things that have not your care needs in a stand him. Johanna in his car. This should not gain it, should not. Eat me the skip, eat me the top. In the door, in the guy. We can't take home. It is staying home. Get on it, the baby nutchet. Oh, then the cut it. Heart, I don't know, I have nutchet. This staying home. When the hood is on it, this staying. Okay, he's in only. The army, when the hood is on it. In non lane. Instant hotni. It near cohort who you argo. The distinct co. Not leaning Codon Hansni. I said ego. The land lane home. A tennikilla. Only his aunt condition is in our. But all this change to Jojon or no done. Kill Jojon. And now, like a hojon is clean only. Was not sling, was not sling, was not sling. Go ahead, speaker.
Thank you very much for that wonderful prayer this morning, Honorable Otto. So that, let me go ahead and just for the record, Ms. Nakai, can we do a roll call?
I believe Linda Uvella is there to provide the roll call. Let me see if I can find because I don't have the roll call sheet or anything. Speaker. Hold on a second. Okay, let me try this. Honorable Amber Crotty. This is roll call for the Naabik'íyáti work session. Okay. So Amber Crotty is present. And then Carl Slater.
Delegate Slater is present.
Okay, and then Charlene So.
Present.
And then Daniel So.
Present.
Edison Wanika. Okay, Edison Wanika. Edmund Yazi. Elmer P. Begay. Eugene So. Eugenia Charles Newton.
Charles Newton is present.
Okay, thank you.
Hold on, Peggy. Hold on.
And then,
somebody who's driving, can you please put your phone on mute? There you go, Peggy.
Okay, Herman Daniels Jr., Jamie Henio, Jimmy Yellowhair, Key Allen Begay Jr.,
Key Allen Begay Jr. is present.
Thank you. Mark Freeland,
Good morning, Freeland's here. Thank you.
thank you. And then Nathaniel Brown,
This is Delegate Nathaniel Brown calling in from Benahutso, Arizona.
okay. Otto So,
Otto So is present.
thank you. Paul Begay,
Paul Begay is present.
okay, thank you. Pernell Halona,
Delegate Halona is present.
okay. Raymond Smith Jr.,
Green.
okay. And then Ricky Nez,
Delegate Rick Nez is here.
okay. And then Seth Damon, speaker.
Present.
Thomas Walker Jr.,
Thomas Walker here.
okay, thank you. And Vince R. James, and Wilson Stewart Jr.
Present from Sawmill.
Okay, thank you. So we have we have 16 members present, Mr. Speaker, for the NABI work session for May 21st, 2020.
Great. And that, again, colleagues, we just did that just for individuals who are present here today. Again, this is a Naabik'íyáti committee work session. So we did call the meeting order, did do an invocation. Moving on down to announcements. Are there any announcements, colleagues?
Speaker.
Honorable Freeland.
Delegate Freeland here. Good morning to my colleagues, Chantal, adult speaker, and staff. Speaker, my colleagues, we do have a Naabik'íyáti State Task Force call on Saturday morning at 9 a.m. We'll begin updates from our lobbyists. We'll be probably more, I haven't reviewed the agenda, but our topic of discussion will center around National Park Service. So good morning to my colleagues and good morning to everyone listening on the World Wide Web. Chantal, thank you.
Speaker, this is Delegate.
Thank you, Honorable Freeland, with that. We're on down. Honorable Otto So.
Thank you very much, Speaker, and then members of the Navajo Nation Council. Today at 1 o'clock, we have Navajo Hopi Land Commission meeting. It's a small corridor between this NABI work session and then with this afternoon's, I think it's a work session also. And so it's about a 2-hour corridor that I will need the attention of the Navajo Hopi Land Commission members to be to call in, and information is emailed out to you guys. Yeah, thank you.
Hey, thank you, Honorable Otto. So, any other announcements? Anybody else? Thank you. Moving on down, then recognizing guests and visiting officials. Thank you to everybody again that's listening on the World Wide Web. Thank you if there's any of our congressional members of Congress, the staff, or individuals from our state legislatures. Thank you for calling in, or from either one of the governor's offices, either one of the 4 states calling in. Thank you to all our partners on the executive side that might be listening in, and to the judicial branch too as well. But most importantly, thank you, colleagues, for making this today. As we know, today is one of the initial steps in order for us to follow up on what we did in discussion on legislation 0115-20. So we can move on the agenda. On the discussion items, we do have presenters here that are readily available and making themselves available to you colleagues, to the council. So without further ado, let me just go on an overview as real quick, and then I'll go ahead and turn it over to the Department of Justice. As you know,
Speaker, can you me first?
okay, let me move over to Office of Legislative Counsel first, then to the Department of Justice. But let me do an overview. As colleagues, as you're aware, we passed legislation 0115-20, which is resolution CMY-44-20, and that was passed by a vote of 19 in favor, 4 opposed, known as the Navajo Nation Cares Fund Act. In that was developing what we know as a Navajo Nation Fund Management Plan. That Navajo Nation Fund Management Plan is an initiative step to move forward on what we are doing here today, and that's getting an overview on what this CARES Act means. Second, from here going forward, Department of Justice, Office of Legislative Counsel will help assist this morning in answering questions that colleagues you might be aware of. Secondly, we did reach out to the Office of the President and Vice President for their presentation on any of their recommendations to the legislation and recommendations to the fund management expenditure plan, which we will start listening to recommendations today after Legislative Council and Navajo Nation Department of Justice. That will be coming from the OPVP and then also from Chief Justice of the Judicial Branch. Chief Justice Joanne Jane and her staff have been aware of that they're presenting today too as well on recommendations for what their branch needs and any dollars that they're needing from the CARES Fund or the Navajo Nation CARES Fund Act in moving forward. Tomorrow we'll be listening to various different options on recommendations for water projects. As you can see, colleagues, that I'll be on Friday, May 22nd, and then on Tuesday, May 26th, we'll be talking about economic development projects. We did send out a schedule over the next 3 weeks, or next 2.5 weeks, on what the different days will conclude, and presenters will present in order for us to go ahead and move forward on identifying what the best possible recommendations are here for. So with that, I know that there was a specific request from our colleagues to go over the overview of not only the federal government's CARE Act, but also the Navajo Nation's CARES Fund Act, and then also questions about the parameters, the allowable, disallowable costs of this, and also recommendations that might be coming from Office Legislative Counsel or from the Department of Justice. I know that we've asked individually if there was any other individuals that both Leg Counsel or Department of Justice were going to have online that could help assist them. I'm not too sure if there is anybody else online, but we can go ahead and see at that time when we go ahead and move forward. So without further ado, colleagues, this is the lineup today. If you see, there's one minor change in here. The president, we did indicate that the president would be available. The memos that went out to the president's office and the memos that were posted out on the emails stated that Office of the President and Chief Justice Joanne Jane's presentations were relatively going to start at 11 a.m. On the agenda, it actually says 1 p.m. So if we could just I'm just letting my colleagues know that it's actually 11 a.m. this morning that they were notified to present. So, but we do have that time frame, and those, like Honorable Otto so says, those initiatives in order to break if we have to and come back, because this is a work session. And if they're not prepared at that time, we can go ahead and move on to the next presenter. But without further ado, let me go over and have Ms. Dana Barbroff go over an overview. And then after the Office of Legislative Counsel is complete, if there's any questions for our Chief Legislative Counsel, Ms. Dana Barbroff, I'll go to her. And then after that, Navajo Nation Department of Justice, you'll be on. So, Ms. Barbroff, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Yate. This is Dana Barbroff, Chief Legislative Counsel. So we've got a lot of materials to cover this morning. So I'm going to do the way I think we are going to structure this. I am going to do a short summary introduction. Then we're going to turn it over to the Department of Justice. They are going to do a fuller presentation, and then at the end we will take questions. During the presentation, if you have a question, feel free to email it to me. I think you all have my address, my email address. So last night at, I don't know, it was late, maybe about 11 o'clock or so, I sent out materials for today's presentation. I emailed them to everybody. I hope you all got them. So last Friday, I believe, Council passed 0115-20. It does need to go to the President. As far as I know, the President has not taken any action on it yet. But 115-20, it established the system or the process for allocating the $600 million that the nation got from the federal government under Title V of the CARES Act. And I want to just emphasize right now, we'll talk about it a little bit further, but it is Title V of the CARES Act. There are a total of 6 titles, but the nation's funding came under Title V. And that is important to remember, because those specific guidelines and rules under Title V is what applies to the $600 million. So legislation 115-20, as I said, it established the system for allocating the $600 million. The system or the process is through one or more expenditure plans. Those expenditure plans will be adopted by the council through legislation. They will then go to the president. The president does have line item veto authority over the expenditure plans. An expenditure plan can be developed for, of course, Navajo government programs. They can be included in expenditure plans. So can chapters, so can townships, so can enterprises, and so also non-government entities. But what I think, based on your questions so far, is that what we need to really focus on today and have some discussion on is what are eligible expenditures under Title V, and Title V is called the Coronavirus Relief Fund, but sometimes it's referred to as Title V, sometimes it's referred to the Coronavirus Relief Fund. All of those rules, etc., are included in 0115-20. So last night when I sent the email out, you had you got a copy of DOJ's PowerPoint. You got a copy of the Title V, the Coronavirus Relief Fund. You got a copy of Treasury guidance for expenditures. You also got a copy of from the Treasury of frequently asked questions about Title V. You also got the Treasury's submission requirements for tribal employment and expenditure requirements. Those go to the second phase of Title V funding. I also included a draft, and I want to emphasize that, a draft expenditure plan template. Hopefully we will have time to go over that. I think it can be used as a good instructional tool. I did it specifically for non-government entities because those will be a little more challenging than your regular Navajo Nation programs. On the line, of course, Jana Warren and Mel Rodas from DOJ, they put together the PowerPoint. Thank you very, very much. And they are going to be presenting on that and most likely incorporating in a lot of the Treasury guidance. Also, on the line, we don't intend to have them present today, but they are there for question answering through DOJ, and myself are Francis Soberg and Marla Hudgens from Lewis and Roca. And I want to thank them very much for their assistance. I know there is a lot of frustration from the delegates so far in that they're not getting the answers they want when they ask, is this particular project eligible for funding under the Navajo Nation CARES Act? And I understand that frustration, but there is no list from the Treasury that really detailed list. There's examples and there are criteria, but there is no list of what types of projects are eligible. So you have to do an analysis on every proposed project, every proposed expenditure. So the goal today is to walk you through that analysis so you understand, and you will start to learn that analysis, and you will start to, as you understand it, be able to apply that at least initially to some of the projects that get brought up. So, and at the end, if at the end of the presentation, if we have time, I would like to walk you through the template. And the other thing I would say before I turn it over to DOJ is let's do questions at the end about specific projects. And so I would encourage you to write down your questions or to email them to me. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to the Department of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, honorable members of the committee. And Ms. Volker.
Speaker, I have a question. Challenge.
Honorable Keelan, you have a question to Ms. Dana Barbroff?
Yes, I have a question for Ms. Barbroff.
Go ahead.
Speaker.
Yes, sir.
Ms. Barbroff, this is Delegate Keelan Begay.
Yes.
Two things. What's the exact date and time legislation 115-20 was certified and sent over to the President's office? Give me the exact date and time. Number two, is this legislation subject to line item veto? Thank you.
Thank you, Keelan, Delegate Keelan Begay. It is, I will have to, as far as when it was sent over to the President's office, that's something that goes to the Office of Legislative Services, not my office. So I'm sure Manuel, Rico, or Tom Platero can probably answer that. As far as line item veto goes, I am taking the position that no, the Navajo Nation CARES Act is not subject to line item veto. There may be differing opinions, but my position is it is not. The expenditure plans developed under it are subject to line item veto. I think that actually that may become a legal question. And so if we're going to discuss that further, I would ask that we do that in executive session. Thank you.
To answer your question, Honorable Keon Begay, the legislation was certified by the Office of Legislative Services. It was signed by myself. At what time? It was sent over at 4:45 p.m. yesterday, which was 5/20/2020. Honorable Keon Begay. Okay, that, moving on. With that, Ms. Warner, I think you were on. You and Mr.
Yes,
Rivas.
thank you, Mr. Speaker, honorable members of the committee, staff, and guests. This is Jana Werner from the Department of Justice Tax and Finance Unit. DOJ will be going over the PowerPoint that Ms. Bobroff sent out last night. So you should have that in front of you. And with that, also presenting along with me is Mr. Mel Rodas. And at this time, I will turn it over to Mr. Rodas.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker and honorable delegates. My name is Mel Rodas. I'm an attorney in the Tax and Finance Unit of DOJ. I've worked for the nation for over 3.5 years under Assistant AG Jana Werner. I've had the pleasure of working with some of you, or maybe even about half of you in the past, in the context of budget and finance, retirement, or even tax issues. And for those of you who don't know me, I really look forward to working with you in the future. And I'd like to thank Mr. Speaker and all of the honorable delegates, and also Ms. Bobroff for inviting DOJ to participate in your work session for the purpose of presenting this overview of Title V. Thank you very much for the invitation. And with that, if you could turn to the statute of the CARES Act, Title V, and this is also slide 2 of the PowerPoint. Congress enacted the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, known as CARES, on March 27th of this year. As Ms. Bobroff mentioned, the CARES Act has six separate titles, but today we're discussing Title V. Title V of the CARES Act is called the Coronavirus Relief Funds. Now, this is also known as Section 601 of the Social Security Act. And that is Exhibit A that Ms. Bobroff emailed to you last night. I'd just like to point out that Title V is very short. It fits on one page of the congressional record in tiny, tiny font, so you might need to wear your glasses when you read it. But it won't take more than 5 minutes or less to read it, and it's really important that you're familiar with it. Now, this Title V, as you know, included the $8 billion emergency aid for tribal governments for COVID-19. And Treasury has only distributed 60% of the $8 billion. So that's $4.8 billion to tribal governments. And that was after around May 5th. This distribution was just based on population. And some people get a little confused about that because in the first certification, Treasury asked for data on population, land base, employees, and expenditures. But the first 4.8 billion was just based on population. Now, as you know, the nation's share of that first 60% distribution was $600,559,530.10. Treasury held back the 40%, and the main reason for that was the litigation about whether Alaska Native corporations should receive funds. Now, the remaining 40% is going to be distributed in June, we hope, based on the number of employees that tribes had in calendar year 19 and the amount of expenditures that tribes had in fiscal year 19. So turning to slide 4, what does the CARES Act say about how tribes can use Title V dollars? There are 3 criteria or requirements, and we have to satisfy all 3 requirements. If the nation expends Title V CARES funds for a purpose or project that does not meet all 3 requirements, the nation will have to repay the federal government. And that's really important to keep in mind, and really why Speaker invited this training today. So let's go over the 3 requirements. Title V provides the coronavirus relief fund shall be used to cover only those costs that, number 1, are necessary expenditures incurred due to the public health emergency with respect to COVID-19. So the keywords there are necessary and due to. And Assistant AG Werner is going to discuss U.S. Treasury's guidance on those terms. And I just want to point out, it's not necessary, it's not enough to say that an expenditure is related to COVID. To satisfy this first requirement, the cost must be incurred for actions taken to respond to the COVID emergency. The costs have to be incurred due to the emergency. So number 2, that the costs were not accounted for in the tribal budget most recently approved as of March 27th of this year. And that means for the Navajo Nation, the nation's FY 2020 comprehensive budget. And that was Resolution CS 3019. Now, if an expense was budgeted for in the FY 20 budget, we cannot use CARES funds. There's one exception. That is unless the cost is for a substantially different use, and AAG Warner is going to discuss that. Now, number 3, that the cost is incurred from March 1 of 2020 through December 30th of 2020. And this is really, really important. If the expenditure was incurred prior to March 1, it's not eligible. It's not eligible for the Title V CARES funds. And unless the deadline is extended, we must use the funds prior to or by December 30th of 2020. And this is a use it or lose it situation. And the clock is ticking. So obviously, all the delegates, all the Navajo Nation leadership is very aware and in tune with this fact that we have to use the funds quickly. But OLC and DOJ is here to support and make sure that the funds are only used for eligible uses and in compliance with the CARES Act and applicable federal and Navajo Nation laws. And at this time, AAG Warner is going to delve more deeply into these three requirements as interpreted by the U.S. Treasury. Jana?
Mr. Speaker, honorable members of the committee, staff, and guests, thank you, Mr. Rodas. So we are now looking at the PowerPoint at page 5. So on page 5, beginning there, we are going to talk about the guidance issued by the U.S. Treasury on April 22. This guidance was also sent to you last night as Exhibit B. This Exhibit B is the same Exhibit B as that attached to the Speaker's Legislation 0115-20, and which is now called Resolution CMY-44-20. So this Treasury guidance dated April 22 will, perhaps already is, but will become more familiar to you as it is attached to the existing resolution that establishes the Navajo Nation CARES Act and the Navajo Nation CARES Fund. The Treasury guidance is titled Coronavirus Relief Fund Guidance for State, Territorial, Local, and Tribal Government. So I want to point out that it is not just the nation and other tribes that are looking at this guidance and trying to figure out, is this an eligible cost or not for use of the Coronavirus Relief Fund. This same guidance is being looked at by states, counties, and other local and territorial governments. So we're all looking at the same guidance as far as what is an eligible cost for spending the Coronavirus Relief Fund. So moving to page 6 of the PowerPoint, the Treasury guidance goes over the 3 points that Mel just talked about. The statute itself has 3 requirements as far as what is an eligible cost, and the guidance expands on those 3 points. The first one is goes back to the question of, is it a necessary expenditure incurred due to the COVID-19 emergency? Treasury guidance says the expenditure must be incurred due to the public health emergency, which means the expenditures must be used for actions taken to respond to the public health emergency. These include things such as addressing medical or public health needs, as well as to respond to other effects of the emergency, such as economic support to those suffering from employment or business interruptions due to the COVID closures. Now, this gets a little bit complicated because later on, Treasury guidance says it cannot be used for revenue replacement. So we have to walk a fine line with respect to costs that are due to business interruption. It also says that the expenditures must be necessary. Now, I really want to focus on this element in the Treasury guidance. We are at page 7 of the PowerPoint. It says that expenditures must be necessary due to the COVID emergency. But it also expressly says the Treasury understands this term broadly to mean that the expenditure is reasonably necessary in the reasonable judgment of the government officials. So this is where the nation will hang its hat on a lot of decisions made by tribal leadership. That means, and when I talk about leadership, of course, I'm talking about the executive, legislative, and judicial branches. So the decisions that the nation makes through its resolutions. What is the reasonable judgment of Navajo leadership? I'm sorry? Okay. So the question is this expenditure reasonably necessary in the reasonable judgment of the tribal leadership? That is going to be a key question that gives the Navajo leadership broad discretion to determine, is this an eligible cost for using the Coronavirus Relief Fund? Next, I'm turning to page 8 of the PowerPoint. This talks about the second point in the CARES Act, whereas Mel said the CARES Act says that the costs are not accounted for in the nation's fiscal year 2020 budget. The guidance expands on that by saying they want to make sure that federal funds aren't going to be used for costs that the nation already knew it was going to have, for costs that the nation already planned for in the last fiscal year budget. So Treasury guidance says a cost is not eligible if it can be funded using an existing line item, allotment, or allocation within the budget. So that's one of the things we'll look for in the expenditure plan. Was this already accounted for in the fiscal year 2020 budget? Now, it says that even if the cost is somewhat described in the 2020 budget, if it is for a substantially different use. So in this way, we have to be careful and expand on to say, oh yeah, in the budget, we had a line item for supplies, but now we're needing supplies for a substantially different use, such as the PPE, et cetera. So that's an example of a substantially different use. Continuing on page 8, I want to point out under number 3C, a cost is still going to be eligible if it's from a supplemental appropriation. So if after March 1, we have expenditures that are based upon supplemental appropriation. And I don't have the number of the resolution off the top of my head. The one that was passed for the $4 million from the UUFB to the Department of Health. That's a classic example of a supplemental appropriation passed after the fiscal year 2020 budget, and that supplemental appropriation cost under that can be spent from the Coronavirus Relief Fund. I think that council also passed last Friday, I think it was $2.4 million to DPS. That also would be considered a supplemental appropriation. Now, not all supplemental appropriations can be paid from the coronavirus relief fund. They will be paid if they are emergency appropriations to respond to the COVID emergency. So I wanted to really emphasize that. And then lastly, on page 8, Treasury says a cost will still be eligible if it could be met with the rainy day fund or similar reserve account. Moving to page 9 of the PowerPoint, Treasury listed what they consider to be eligible expenditures. So we've kind of quoted that here on page 9. They say eligible expenditures are expenditures of actions to facilitate compliance with the COVID measures. And examples are expenses to facilitate distancing, learning, technological improvements in connection with school closing, expenses to improve telework capabilities for council, NABI, et cetera, to enable compliance with the COVID precautions and other COVID-related expenses reasonably necessary for the government to function. On page 10, we're also quoting from the Treasury guidance where they list what they consider to be ineligible. And ineligible cost will be if the nation is receiving reimbursement from the federal government for some cost or expense, we cannot double dip and also have that expense paid by the Coronavirus Relief Fund and by existing reimbursements we're getting from the feds. Also, it says the Coronavirus Relief Fund cannot be used to fill shortfalls in revenue. They're really focused in the Treasury guidance that revenue replacement is not allowed. They say a broad range is allowed, but revenue replacement is not allowed. And then going back to Mel's point about the third requirement under the Federal Act, that the expenses have to be incurred from March 1 to December 30th. At page 11 of the Treasury guidance, unfortunately, Treasury is specific by saying the word incurred means when the government has expended the funds to cover the cost. So it really puts a pretty hard stop as far as the December 3rd deadline. That's the way we view this. I know there is discussion about requesting further guidance from Treasury to change or expand this. There's also further discussion about going back to Congress and asking for an amendment. But currently, this is the law that we're dealing with. And this is problematic, especially for our request for payment of things like the capital projects and construction projects. But with that, that highlights what we consider to be the Treasury guidance dated April 22. Treasury also issued further guidance called Frequently Asked Questions, and Mr. Rodas will discuss those beginning at page 12 of the PowerPoint. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members of the committee.
Jenna. Go ahead, Mel.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the committee. So turning to slide 12, Treasury issued the Coronavirus Relief Fund frequently asked questions. That was updated as of May 4th of this year, and Ms. Bobroff emailed that to you as Exhibit C. So that should be before you from your email last night. That's about a 6.5-page document. It had 31 questions and answers on eligible expenditures. So it's definitely worth your time in looking at. If you have questions about eligible expenditures, please read those 31 questions and answers. And then there were 5 questions and answers on administration of fund payments. But today we're going to discuss 9 of the 36 questions and answers. And I just want to emphasize it's not an exhaustive list. As Ms. Bobroff mentioned, this is not an all-inclusive list of eligible and ineligible expenditures. Those 31 questions and answers. So, Mr. Speaker and honorable delegates and other Navajo Nation leaders on the line, I'm sure that you can think of creative uses for these Title V CARES funds that Treasury has never even considered. And then OLC, DOJ, and the controller are going to be asked to evaluate whether those proposed expenditures would be eligible or not. I just want to emphasize there are going to be gray areas. It's not always going to be black and white. We're not always going to have the answer, and we certainly hope that Treasury will release additional guidance and additional FAQs in the future. But for now, this is what we have to work with. So with that, turning to slide 13, we'll just go over the 9 questions and answers that we wanted to focus on today. So number 1 question, are governments required to submit proposed expenditures to Treasury for approval? The answer to this is a definitive no. Governments are responsible for making determinations as to what expenditures are necessary due to the public health emergency with respect to COVID, and governments do not need to submit any proposed expenditures to Treasury. Now, if we're really struggling with the question about whether something's permissible or not, that would be up to leadership to decide if you wanted to seek guidance from Treasury, but there's absolutely no requirement to submit expenditure plans to Treasury for approval. Question 2, how does the government determine whether payroll expenses for a given employee satisfy the substantially dedicated condition? So the answer to that is the fund is designed to provide ready funding to address unforeseen financial needs and risks created by COVID-19 emergency. Now, the answer goes on to state that tribes can presume payroll costs for public health and public safety employees meet the condition. But in the sentence above, what I really want to highlight is that the financial needs and risks must have been unforeseen, meaning the needs and risks did not exist before and that they were created by the COVID emergency. So the keyword there is unforeseen. Now turning to slide 14, and you'll remember that we discussed earlier that the second of the 3 requirements to use Title V funding is that the cost was not accounted for in the FY20 budget. And then Treasury guidance went on to say that that was unless the cost was for a substantially different use. So here in the FAQs, the Treasury question is, what would qualify as a substantially different use for purposes of the fund eligibility? And the answer is costs incurred for a substantially different use include but are not limited to costs of personnel and services that were budgeted for in the most recently approved budget, but which due to entirely to COVID-19 have been diverted to substantially different functions. What do they mean by that? So This means that we can use Title V funds for payroll costs for employees who are undertaking more and different responsibilities that were not part of their ordinary duties and that they're doing so due to COVID. Examples would be diverting police officers and correction officers to enforce curfew, or teachers having to develop curriculum for online learning and to provide IT support to facilitate online learning. Some examples I could think of for COVID-related services that are substantially different use than what's in the budget could be, for example, DOJ having a fixed cost litigation account that was in the FY20 budget, but obviously DOJ is going to have outside counsel expenses to advise us on the CARES Act. Other examples, OOC and OMB are going to have different and additional costs for consultants due to COVID. Now, turning to slide 15, are there prohibitions on combining a transaction supported with fund payments, Title V fund payments, with other CARES Act funding or COVID-19 relief federal funding? And this is what I call the no double dipping rule. So expenses that have been or will be reimbursed under any federal program are not eligible for use of these funds. So if the nation is getting a grant under Title VI of the CARES Act, we can't use Title V funds for the same purpose and use. Then question 5 here, may fund payments be used to assist impacted property owners with the payment of property taxes? We don't have a property tax per se, we have the possessory interest tax, but the reason that we put this in here is because of the answer. The answer was really important. No fund payments may not be used for government revenue replacement. And that statement is not just specific to taxes, it's in general, we can't use Title V CARES Act funds to replace lost revenue. And then turning to slide 16, obviously many Navajo leaders are discussing right now capital improvement projects, such as water, power, telecommunication, and so forth. So under the FAQ, question number 6, could fund payments be used for capital improvement projects that broadly provide potential economic development in the community? The answer is maybe. So the answer here on the PowerPoint is, in general, no. In general, these funds are not for capital improvement projects, but it goes on. If capital improvement projects are not necessary expenditures incurred due to COVID-19 public health emergency, fund payments may not be used for capital projects. However, fund payments may be used for expenses, for example, establishing temporary public medical facilities, and here's what I think can help us, and other measures to increase COVID-19 treatment capacity or improve mitigation measures, including related construction costs. So obviously, an expenditure always has to be necessary and incurred due to the COVID emergency. And again, the part of this answer that I think is helpful to support leadership's desire to use some funds for capital improvement projects is this language about other measures to improve mitigation measures. So I just wanted to call that to your attention. Turning to slide 17, the question is, may counties prepay? This is a prepayment question. May counties prepay with CARES Act funds for expenses such as a 1 or 2 year facility lease and such as house staff hired in response to COVID-19? Now, don't focus too much on counties. This is just, in general, can governments use Title V CARES Act funds to prepay for expenses? The answer is the government should not make prepayments on contracts using the fund to the extent that doing so would not be consistent with its ordinary course policies and procedures. So this means if our government doesn't normally prepay, don't prepay. That rule is somewhat problematic for the nation because under our current procurement law rules and regs, we don't prepay for goods before they're delivered. We don't prepay for services before they're performed. So this creates a bit of a timing problem, but we're hoping that that can be addressed in the future. So turning to slide 18, question 8, do governments have to return unspent funds to Treasury? And the answer is yes. So the Act provides for recoupment by the Department of Treasury of amounts received from the fund that have not been used in a manner consistent with the Act. And if the government has not used the funds it received by December 30th, as required by the statute, these funds must be returned. So I call this rule the use it or lose it rule, or the misuse it and lose it rule. Turning to slide 19, this is about record keeping. Question 9, what records must be kept by governments receiving the payment? The answer is the government should keep records sufficient to demonstrate that the amount of fund payments to the government has been used in accordance with Section 601D of the Social Security Act. And I mentioned earlier that Section 601D is the section of the CARES Act with the 3 criteria, or the 3 requirements, which again are that costs are necessary expenditures incurred due to COVID. 2, that costs were not accounted for in the FY20 budget. And 3, that costs were incurred between March 1 and December 30 of 2020. So now I'll turn it back to Assistant AG Werner to discuss Inspector General oversight.
Thank you, Mel.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members of the committee, staff and guests, thank you, Mr. Rodas. We are now at page 20 of the PowerPoint. So the Act itself has some special laws giving certain powers to the Inspector General of the U.S. Treasury. Again, I want to point out that these Treasury documents, the guidance, the FAQ, relate not just to tribes, but also to states, county, and other local governments. So the nation is working under the same rules that, with respect to what we're pointing out here, to the same rules that states and counties are working under. So the Act itself gives the Inspector General the authority to monitor and oversee the receipt, disbursement, and use of the Coronavirus Relief Fund. Congress appropriated $35 million to the Inspector General to carry out the oversight and recoupment duties. So you can see from that Congress is serious about making sure that the monies are spent properly. I think slide number 21 is a duplicate of number 20, so I'm moving to slide 22, that improperly used or unused funds have to be returned to the treasurer, to the Treasury. So what I want to point out with respect to this is, yes, the nation has to have a clear idea that the funds are being spent for the uses that are eligible as stated in the Act. If there is an audit by the Inspector General, number one, we don't know for sure that there will be because tribes are thrown in with states and counties. The nation is receiving a large amount of the funds that go to tribes in general, but an audit could look at, well, was this in your budget already? The tribe could look at the double dipping issue, or the Inspector General, or the Inspector General could look, further into the weeds. Is this particular use, was it reasonably necessary in the reasonable judgment of the Navajo leadership? So it's kind of a broad brush, but it is kind of the carrot and the stick. This is kind of the stick at the end of the Act. So we need delegates to be aware of that. Then with that, moving on to page 23 in the PowerPoint, that relates to the second 40% distribution. And Mr. Speaker, at this time, I would like to turn it back to Mr. Rodas. Thank you.
Go ahead, Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So as you know, Treasury only released 60% of the Title V CARES funds. That was based on tribal enrollment. 40% remains to be distributed. That distribution is going to be based on tribal employment and expenditures. So before distributing the remaining 40%, Treasury is requiring tribes to submit additional information regarding employment and expenditures. So basically, we have to back up the data that we included in our original certification to Treasury. And the deadline for this is 11:59 p.m., so just prior to midnight on Tuesday, and that's Alaska Daylight Time. So the Washington office is collaborating with executive and legislative and many parties, getting this data together, organizing it, and then they'll submit it well in advance of that time, well in advance of midnight. Now turning to slide 24, what supplemental information and documents are required? Employment information we talked about. So employment is based on the calendar year and expenditures are based on the fiscal year. So Treasury wants, for each quarter of calendar year 2019, the number of employees that were employed, one, by the tribe, so by the tribal government directly, and two, by any entity which the tribal government owns at least a 51% ownership interest. And so that would be our enterprises, because those are wholly owned by the nation. And then it goes on to say tribes shall not include independent contractors or the employees of independent contractors. And then tribes must submit copies of their IRS Form 941. And the 941 is just a tax form that says how many employees you have, and then payroll data. So moving on to slide 25, expenditure information. What do they want to know here? They want to know the total governmental expenditures for the 12 months of fiscal 2019. And then they go on to say governmental expenditures include, but are not exclusive of, general government, public safety, health services, wellness services, substance abuse, general welfare and assistance, community services, cultural programs, education and recreation, housing, economic development, planning and development, sanitation, judicial, and similar activities. It does not include capital outlays and debt service costs. So essentially all governmental expenditures except capital outlays and debt service are going to be included. So enterprise expenditures are going to be included to the extent that they relate to these governmental services that were mentioned here. So I don't want to go too much into detail about that right now, but that's a discussion that we need to work through with the Washington office and the enterprises as they're collecting this data for submission here. So turning to page 26 on expenditure information still, the Treasury wants to know the total amount of federal financial assistance that the nation received for FY 2019, and they want worksheets. So we have to show our math, essentially, show how the dollar amounts are derived, and we have to submit documents to support these figures. And the information that we provide has to be consistent with our financial statements filed pursuant to the Single Audit Act or program-specific audits. So with that, I'll just ask if AAG Werner has any summarizing comments, and then we'd be open to Q&A. Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. And with that, we'll turn it back to Ms. Bobroff and to the speaker. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Bobroff?
Thank you, Department of Justice. That was much appreciated. The documents you received in the email and that we've discussed today, they are not attorney-client privileged. You may share them with your chapters, any other organizations you are working with. I am going to impose on probably Legislative Services or the Speaker's Office to put those documents into some type of binder or hard copies of those documents in binders for you. Before we get to questions, I think I would like you to turn to what is called in that email. It's a Word document. It's called Navajo Nation CARES Act Non-Government Entity Expenditure Plan Template. I want to go over it very quickly, and I want to re-emphasize it is a draft. It has not been, it's supposed to, these templates are supposed to be collaborative efforts with the Office of Legislative Counsel, DOJ, the Controller's Office, and OMB. We have not yet gotten that far. Sorry, I tripped over my tongue there. But I included it here because I know from conversations with the delegates that they are getting lots of proposals from non-government entities about who would like some of the 600 million. What Office of Legislative Counsel envisions is this template would be filled out by the non-government entity and be the cover sheet for their proposal. So it's really some pretty simple questions. They have already been really discussed a little more in detail by the Department of Justice, but we'll just go through it real quickly. I think that using a template will be much easier for the council and other leadership to compare various proposals. Will also be a good way when reviewers are looking for information. So with that, the first question would be the amount of funds that the non-government entity, the organization, is requiring. The name of the organization. Next question is organization requesting the funds. The next question is, how will funds be issued to the organization? Will they go through a grant agreement, an MOA? Will it be direct funding? There's other options, but that needs to be identified. The next question is the specific purposes for which the requested funds will be used. And also the proposal that the organization has put together would be attached to this template. The next question, really important. How will the funding respond to the COVID public health emergency? That goes back to DOJ's discussions about incurred and due to. This is where the organization will explain how the funding, how that will, the funding they will requesting will fund some action taken in response to the public health emergency. That is going to be an important question. This next question is percentages of funds used for overhead administrative costs. That question is not actually required by the Treasury guidance or Title V, but it is a concern that has been brought up by a couple of delegates. So that's why that's put there. The next question is, was requested funding in a budget approved before March 27, 2020? That can be a no. If it is a yes, we would like the identification of the budget. This next question, by what date will the funds be fully expended? As said prior, right now, without any further amendments, the federal statute, Title V, says December 30th, 2020. The next question will provide some useful information to the leadership, and that is what challenges to prevent full expenditure of funds sizes above this. Speaker, I am getting a lot of static. I don't know if others are. Can you still hear me?
We can hear you, Ms. Barbroff.
Okay. I was afraid I was talking to myself. The next question is to identify the standing committee with oversight over the funded activity. So even outside organizations, a standing committee will have oversight over the funded activity. The next question is what Navajo Nation program department will be responsible to monitor the funding. That could be OMB. It could also be a Navajo division or such. The next question, reporting requirements applicable to the funding. That will probably be a combination of things. Oversight committees, OPVP will probably want progress reports. OMB may want financial expenditure documents that will have to be worked out. The last question is the job title of the person responsible for day-to-day administration of the funding. Of course, contact info would need to be included. the last part is that a board of directors resolution or the equivalent requesting the funding should be attached, and that resolution should affirm that the funding will only be used in compliance with Title V and the Navajo Nation Affairs Fund Act, and they will comply with Navajo Nation laws and regulations. And the last thing that the Board of Directors resolution should affirm is that the organization will indemnify the Navajo Nation for any expenditures deemed to be disallowed. Well, basically what that means is if an organization misspends the funds, that they are promising that they will pay them back to the nation. The nation will thus then probably have to pay them back to the Treasury. So, Speaker, at this point, I think now, since we're starting to run out of time, that now would probably be a good time for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Barbroff, and thank you to Ms. Warner and Mr. Rodas for the presentation and overview on the PowerPoint too as well. That, colleagues, let me go ahead and go to the floor. Any comments, questions?
Speaker, this is Vice Chair Smith.
Go ahead, Vice Chair.
Thank you for the update on CARES Act, laws, regulations, and good morning, Fish my son. And to those that are listening, there's a lot of stipulations, a lot of laws governing this, and we don't have enough time. As we speak, December 30th is going to come around in no time, and quite concerned about what was presented by Attorney Mel Rodas. We don't use, we lose. We misuse, we lose. My question is not on the not using or the misuse, is when we hopefully can open the door for contractors to come in. As you well know, the Navajo Nation itself will require invoices. They're not going to, like I heard earlier, we don't pay up front. So how do we manage that? Because invoices are usually done quarterly. I know for a fact some of the invoices that are presented are paid out quarterly and they don't get paid on time. So how do we address that? Because these money's got to be spent. And if we have a contractor start, let's say August, and they're only going to be paid a certain amount, and they're supposed to be paid out at the end of the contract. That's my concern, Speaker. I don't know who can answer that or how we're going to address that. Thank you, Speaker, for letting me ask a question. Yeah.
We go over to Honorable Stewart.
Good morning, Speaker. Good morning, colleagues and presenters. The question I have is, with this funding that we are going to receive, and what it is stated with the hazard pay, whatnot, knowing that we have employees out there that are doing their regular duties, and it was stated earlier that these are individuals that would go and do something else. How does that affect the others that were in the office that we presumed would have gotten this hazard pay? Are they still going to be qualified for that? That would be the other one. And the other one is with it being stated that these are all for COVID. They have to be related to COVID-19 expenditures or expenses. So with the goals and whatnot that we had, the desires to go ahead and move forward with telecommunications, everything. And that's been on the table for some time now, even with prior to our leadership. It has always been there on the table. So how are we going to do that? Is that even justifiable at this time to use it towards that? Those are some concerns that I have. And knowing that, you know, we do have fall situations where some of it is stated in one way, like it was stated before, it is approved, but then in another way, it is not approved, depending on how it is worded. So how is that going to help us? Those are my concerns. One back on you.
Any other comments, questions, colleagues?
Speaker, this is Delegate Rick Nez here.
Okay, go ahead, Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Speaker Damon and honorable members of the 24th Council, DOJ, as well as Ms. Bobroff. This is a question for Department of Justice. On your slide 16, it says, could fund payments be used for capital improvement projects that broadly provide potential economic development in the community? In general, the answer is no, it says. Now, if capital improvement projects are necessary expenditures incurred due to, I see that this is what it's for, incurred due to COVID-19 public health emergency. Now, my concern and question is, as far as capital improvement projects, we understand that water has been a major issue. And this, having the Navajo Nation, our people have water, all of them. How can we give them water if some of these projects were not, let's say, for example, Gallup Navajo Water Supply Line, which is short by 40 million. And our people, this water would help a lot of people down 491 and then west towards Ganado. And a lot of our people need water. And would this be a necessary expenditure to pay for that? Because it is a capital improvement to my understanding, even though it says no. How can we justify this expenditure? Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Let me go back to okay, let me go to Honorable Helena, and then I'll come back to Ms. Barbroff and Ms. Warner and Mr. Rodas. Honorable Helena?
Yes, thank you, Speaker, and my colleagues and everybody on the wide web, listening on the website. My question is on the capital improvement stuff. You know, we really would need to get the water lines out to the homes, to the people out there who don't have running water, because this is a big issue. To wash your hands and keep your homes clean. And would that be enough justification to move forward with all those water line projects? Because across the Navajo Nation, there's several areas, especially out on the western side around Black Mesa area, where they need to have this water. And of course, that's one of the hot spots. And and then not only that, but to have the water, you need to have electricity, lines running out there, unless they're using propane or water heaters, take electricity and propane to keep the water hot. And that's also a necessity to keep your house and keep your hands washed and keep cleaning everything. So my question is just that. I believe that is a necessary expenditure due to the COVID-19, because it's keep sanitize everything, keep washing your hands, and so that should be enough. And we're asking, is that enough to be able to justify doing all the water lines and electrical lines that we need to be putting up, as well as you know, the schools for infrastructure for broadband, for the computer services, because, you know, we don't know that next year we might have to be running into the same problem and we'll be having to shut our schools down again. And they need to have the kids access to the internet so they can do school online if we have to. So those are a couple of questions that I had, and I just wanted to see if that would be enough justification. We need to move forward, concentrate on to begin with. Thank you, Speaker.
Okay, thank you, Honorable Warner. Now let me go back to Ms. Barbroff and Ms. Warner and Mr. Rodas. Ms. Barbroff?
Thank you, Speaker. I'm going to quickly respond to Delegate Smith's question. And the reason I'm saying quickly is because he brings up a question that has been on everybody's mind, and that is, how are we going to move this money through the Navajo bureaucracy and system? That is a question that we need to work with the Office of the Controller, OMB, and others to address that. I think that should be a high priority discussion, but it is not a discussion that DOJ or Legislative Council can answer here today. So I am presuming that the Speaker's office will be setting up some type of meetings, or maybe NABI will. I'm not sure how that process will work with OMB and the Controller's office. The other question asked by Delegate Wilson, Chairman Nez, and Delegate Halona, I am going to turn those to DOJ. The reason I'm turning Delegate Wilson's question over was because I couldn't hear it very well. It was kind of fading in and out. I'm hoping DOJ heard it better. But before I turn it over, I just want to emphasize that as things stand now, when we're talking about are these types of expenditures eligible, Delegate Halona did a good job, I believe, in talking about how the water lines, electricity could be tied. It could be due to mitigating the effects of the virus. But the other thing, it's not just a single question. The other thing is right now is, can those funds be spent by December 30th this year? That's 8. Is it even 8? It's 6 months from now, 7 months from now. So that is something that we have to keep in all of our minds. So, Speaker, so now I'm going to turn back to DOJ.
And before we go to Department of Justice, just to add on to the question about what Ms. Barbroff was indicated, Speaker's office has set up a whole day for internal, topic items is discussion, for discussion is internal barriers and internal and external barriers. And some of those things are issues involving from what your colleagues have indicated, and even you, Honorable Vice Chair Smith, about procurement issues, about issues with the Controller's office, issues with certain departments like CPMD, and also external issues regarding BIA, like right-of-ways or internal areas of interest surrounding EPA and needing to get waivers through there. So we have set a whole day up for that. And if you can see on that chart that we sent out last night from Chief of Staff LaShawna So indicated, I do believe that day is on June 2nd or 3rd, actually. And that's what the whole day we're going to be discussing all those issues, Honorable Vice Chair Smith. So with that, Ms. Warner.
Speaker, this Delegate So.
Honorable, so let me go back to Ms. Horner to answer Honorable Stewart, Honorable Nez, and Honorable Holonas, and then I'll come back to you.
10-4.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members of the committee, and Delegate Nez and Halona, let me speak to this question about capital projects for water, electricity, and broadband. So when the question is, can we use coronavirus relief funds for all our water projects and electricity and broadband projects? The answer is probably not for all of them. This goes back to this template created by Ms. Bobroff with the questionnaire that will be very specific about how will the funds be used. So there's not a blanket answer on the capital projects. As you can see, Treasury is saying, in general, capital projects cannot be covered. However, the guidance then goes on to talk about unless it's for mitigation. And this is where I think, as everyone knows, given the situation with the Navajo, we can talk about mitigation. And now please understand I'm talking in general terms. So I'm not saying blanket, yes, these funds can be used for these purposes. But in general, we know that the question is, what is the reasonable judgment of Navajo leadership? Is this a necessary expense due to COVID and to address mitigation measures? Well, we know that the CDC guidelines talk about hand washing, social distancing. So many of these mitigation measures will go to what is necessary for our people to do the necessary hand washing and social distancing. Surely the need for water and attendant electricity and broadband for education, police service, et cetera, could be reasonably necessary in the minds of leadership. So yes, across the board, we're not saying that water, electrical, and broadband cannot be paid. We're saying if we can tie it to something that's due to mitigating the effects of COVID among our people, that yes, we can make that argument. But it has to be specific, and Ms. Bobroff's template is a great place to start. So there will be some type of case-by-case analysis. I would really like to ask Mr. Rodas, he's done a lot of work on this issue, that perhaps he has some further comments on this very important question about use of the money for capital projects. Mr. Rodas?
Thank Ms. Warner and Mr. Speaker, honorable delegates. I think another issue, well, first of all, we do have to go, as AAG Warner said, we do have to go through the exercise every time of saying, does this proposed use meet all three requirements? So it has to be necessary and incurred due to COVID. It can't have been in the FY20 budget unless it's a substantially different use. And it has to be incurred, as Ms. Bobroff said, it has to be incurred between March 1 and December 30. One of the issues, I totally agree with AAG Warner about being, Navajo leaders exercising their judgment and discretion about whether it's necessary. I think one of the legal issues that is also relevant to the discussion is whether it was unforeseen, whether these were unforeseen financial needs and risks created by COVID, or were they pre-existing and foreseen financial needs and risks that aren't created by COVID. And so that kind of goes back to, it's not enough to be related to COVID, it has to be incurred due to COVID. I think it's not a slam dunk answer, yes or no. I think there's some gray areas, but as A.Z. Warner said, we can make the legal argument. We have a defensible legal argument, but there is still some risk, and it's at the discretion of Navajo leadership to decide, do we assume that risk, that there is a chance that we can extend these funds and then have to pay them back if the Inspector General determines that it was an ineligible expenditure. Mr. Speaker.
Okay, thank you, Mel. With that, we'll go back to colleagues on Naabik'íyáti Committee. Honorable Otto So.
Thank you very much, Speaker. My question to the Department of Justice is, we know that the Navajo system here that we have is an issue, and you just look at generally the 164 process, or you look at a legislation that needs to be passed relating to waivers, and council gets scrutinized for these waivers. Oh, council's a waiver this, and the people wasn't part of the planning. Is what generally what is being told to the Navajo people. But in order to get a lot of these funds expended, we have to waive certain provisions in the Navajo law to try to get this these projects, if they're eligible for COVID-related expenditures, so we could get these projects moving. And Honorable Smith is right. We have our own system that's a holdup, and we have to start looking at that. And I believe maybe if we could start looking at that in general, and where can we waive these provisions so that the 164 process review is not necessary or not needed if it's a COVID-related project or expenditure. And we just have to make sure that Department of Justice dots the I and checks across the T's for us to make sure that we have a legal argument to say that this expenditure qualifies for COVID-19 relief expenditures. The other is that the CFR that governs Indian country is a hindrance again. And we have to start working the federal government, whether it's related to tribal trust lands, allotment lands, BLM lands, and so forth. The CFRs, we need to start looking at that. And I wish that the Department of Justice could start getting us guidance relating to that, to start putting something together so we could, we have to make a trip to Washington. We are in communication with the White House, but we need to have a conversation with the congressional leaders to look at waivers for these requirements that are in the 25 CFR. And the 25 CFR governs Indian country. And that's the reason why a right-of-way process, minimal at BIA only, takes 6 months. The Navajo Nation right-of-way process, I don't know. The last time I went through it right-of-way, the Navajo Nation process took about 8 months. It sat at some division director's desk for about 2 or 3 weeks, and they're not on top of it. And if you look at the Navajo Nation system and the right-of-way process and the BI right-of-way process, that's 1 year of right-of-way process. So we need to start looking at that as leadership. Thank you very much, Speaker.
Again, Honorable Otto, so just to answer that, we will be having one, if not 2 whole days on that process, and Department of Justice. So look forward to you being a part of that to help assist, because there is waivers that are going to be needed in order for us to make sure that we draw down on these funds in an efficient time, especially in order for us to go ahead and meet the deadline of December 30th, 2020. So look forward to that. And then we can go ahead and have that become a reality and put that language in the legislation or the expenditure plan. Hey, colleagues, any comments, questions to either Office of Legislative Counsel or the Department of Justice?
Speaker.
Yes.
Speaker.
Delegate Freeland.
Honorable Vice Chair Walker and Honorable Mark Freeland.
Speaker, thank you. Other colleagues on the call, then the presenters, Dana Bobroff, DOJ, thank you for the very, very important and critical information shared with leadership this morning. Yeah. And thank you for the invocation also. Very, very important that we keep, our focus, and through prayers that always takes us back to that point of understanding and caring and looking at our people. Appreciate that. Yeah. Question, Speaker, though, our staff and then those are on the call, our connections or our contact with the federal government, especially the congressional side, where some of these concerns need to be conveyed, some of these questions need to be asked, some of these requests for assistance, further guidance need to be conveyed. And this is just a comment, Speaker. So it seems like now is the time to step up our lobbying efforts also. First of all, the request to extend the deadline of December 31st. Today, because each one of us are in a position to provide that advocacy and that representation for our nation as well as our respective communities and regions. And I would like at some point to get briefings on exactly what is happening in the nation's capital, also Congress, the House and Senate. I don't think they're just watching. I think there are plenty of activities, revolving around the CARES Act fund for the states and other jurisdictions, including tribes. So I would like to, have us focus on that as well. I wanted to make that comment, Speaker. Thank you for this time.
Thank you, Vice Chair Walker. Moving on, Honorable Freeland.
Morning, Speaker. Department of Justice, Ms. Off, your staff, legislative staff, and all those listening online. Listening to the presentation from DOJ and them emphasizing that these CARES money cannot be utilized for capital projects, but it has to be specifically COVID related. Now, water projects, electric projects, and bathroom additions, to me, I emphasize this because they can be deemed COVID related and they are capital projects. I say this because when we get these water lines done, when we get these bathroom additions done, when we get these electric lines done, these are going to be mechanisms to be utilized to prevent COVID-19. It's going to give our people the ability to prevent COVID-related issues coming into their homes. And they have the sanitary purpose, they have the sanitary reasons, they have the sanitary mechanisms available to them. It's a way to give them running water. You know, when you can bring a bathtub, a commode, and a sink into someone's home, to me, that's a game changer. That's really a no-brainer for a lot of us. And considering that there's 7,000 homes right now across our great Navajo Nation without any water whatsoever, and to hook everyone up is going to cost $1.5 billion. So we have an enormous task to get done here, Shnatai. I think we need to put all of our great minds together. We need to come together collectively. We just need to figure out what projects are construction ready. In the meantime, in the background, we also need to start working on a lot of these rights-of-ways, obtaining rights-of-ways. And that's the other problem, or the other challenge, not problem, but challenge, Shnatai, obtaining rights-of-ways. And how are we going to ask for fast tracks, or how are we going to get waivers? Obtaining the right-of-ways alone is going to be such an enormous task. And then we have to look at designs of water lines. We don't have enough engineers, and that's the challenge we're faced with right now. Office of Environmental Health, OEH, with IHS, Navajo area stated that we don't have enough engineers to design these water lines, and we need to figure out the designs, but we also need to look at the construction part as well. So if we can help bring water to homes, if we can help give families the ability to bathe or to use use necessities within their home, that's going to really help out a lot of families. And I just say that, Shnatai, wholeheartedly, because our dear Navajo people are counting on us, and we need to really make sure that we do our best to answer this calling. So, Edia, thank you, Speaker, and my colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Freeland. Any other comments, questions? Colleagues?
Eugene So here.
Eugene So, the floor is yours.
I'm over here trying to pick up some stuff from Phoenix for the veterans. They got some donation here at the airport, shouldn't they? So I'm just not off of it. So what I was going to say in regards to this PowerPoint discussion here, according to a lot of things that's in there, I know what everybody is saying, and I know they're true. But right now, what is written, so we can't really change a lot of this and that. But we have to find a language or word somewhere we can put a thread through it and make it wider. We can use it that way. That's where our lawyers come in. So I'm pretty sure there's a way we can do that. Because my concern is all the windmills across the Navajo Nation. It needs to be fixed. I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure Ms. Salva already has a number on it. How much it's going to cost if we fix all that up? And also all the NTA should know is that all the restaurants that are not being used because something happened to them. They need to put some maintenance on them. All the Navajos that have their restroom, they're not using it because they're damaged. There's a lot out there. If we could ask the NTA to get all those, we can fix it for them. There's a lot of things you can do, I think, with this money. But for that, sometimes I always say, the government can give you money for a jacket, but you can only wear it in July and August. You can't wear it in December. So that's how I see that the money, the funds are always stipulated. A lot of the laws, tied down. But I'm pretty sure we got lawyers that can find a little word that we can use, to cover all whatever we're trying to put down on this on the Navajo Nation to help the people. So that's all I can say in regards to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Eugene. So we go on over to Honorable Keon Begay.
Speaker.
Keon Begay.
Yes. Snantana Finiki, Nahasna. Akoko, I was hoping to hear today. Le Washington, not it on Hapan Dasani, not it on Fitch a hot. Did a person, Leniki, Quacky Pohonet Zabe, in that of Nistot it our Quacky 8 of Pohonet Zata. Hatnigu Colachot, I in Rondo Lehendenson. I even emailed several last week to the Attorney General, though our Legislative Council, but Ishla, Hanagi, Dik Abche, the Kahaki, Donit Anle Washington, then Heshina Sos Hate di La the Bill. Had the Nahat La Ilapa Soho Cosco Etik at Hatelia Ek at Quadre, but says clearly to beat the meat so. Wait, now a base of Babbitt's Acha. La Ada did on his hot, Ahaton needle that I see the Nachaeton and Kago Alapa Yale Kito listen a Kadit Abnesa Hotel, Nato did Abnesa di Ne. So quacky Gila. I yell it at a thing. Has it out or Yego. At Kito Ala is Neta. Jo Dadanta. Last week, Kodo. Now, so space bounce under the Jago go down that set now got the president's officer at Tachohato me. Joe Quacky Yego. Shit, this Asher Zinc. Out of the right of way that's it. The end that Kunana. They are in Hini did ego Kunka did hot on the store taught a basic cheat on the store did all quacky. Hey, ego last quacky, our sacrijonate, ounce quiet indeed, Nishikis Pohonets. Johat Nego got that say, and Linigi Elia. Joe quacky, Giel shit this at the Joe. Oshashin, do did asa, Bakato did asa, Yayat, the in the shashin. Oh, what ego, oh, it's so, Speaker, I believe the council needs to take another step to get the intent bill that was passed by Congress, and $8 billion was set aside for tribes. So what we're talking about, could we have an official statement from Congress? Maybe our Navajo delegation could help us to say that the do and not allowable and not allowable lists, send it to them and say that these are allowable and these won't be allowable. And that will have us focus on what needs to be done. So I believe that's what needs to be done. I know Seniki, they got Osha Shendo, that so hot Niniki, what other legislative council, when this is, I'm thinking, may be interpreted differently. Not that meaning DOJ may interpret it differently as well. A quacky yego shit is at the Nahoti eti need the Bakahons at the on his whole gestide. The Nebuchadnezzar na on ni has not la the nan liniki kabebe in a bananas did out of Zoa Lapa child Nako. Open Yale shit or baby not seal angle go crack it or Zogo Jobago a Lapa Nick. Hit nay last at Adon Nidigate Kitahoni Coco. So quite it did out your side, Hula Ketando Tachinte. Share what up is a zero up in such case. The Hozorski Kata. Maybe that's another reason why I chose to have a backup plan to sign on as a co-sponsor of the 116. The Hozorski Nago Hash and Kotoda Seto Hazor Hotot after Nahuinson. And I thought after speaker the president Hazorki asked Hazon Hitcher now bent on Nishiki art based kitten Nick. Nigo got the April Net Santo. They got open calls, the ship calls, the ship calls, just not as that it all left on Yale or little. Had a net land, God forbid, and I hope not, but has net land his nan Lingiego, but not the wheat, not all less. So, Ede could only his kid, Mr. Speaker, the Legislative Council and DOJ, could you please send a statement directly to Treasury? Send a statement directly to Congress and ask them specifically that the Navajo Nation is planning to utilize these funding for this purpose, list them, and have them give us an answer to say that these aren't allowable and these will be allowable. And that will give the Navajo Nation to concentrate on those areas that the Navajo Nation is wanting to spend the money on behalf of the Navajo people. So I could also say that seat election and Arnold Shitty Abe, Shitty Ado, Halit out Eonson, such case, either. So what else you have seat election, Mr. Speaker? Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Honorable Calumbier. Pat, colleagues, any other comments, questions to Department of Justice, Office Legislative Council? If none, if there are any other questions, though, regarding the questions for possible ideas for expenditure, Ms. Barbara, if you did indicate that you have that form available, maybe you could go over that or explain that form one more time.
Okay, certainly, Speaker. So it is included in the email that was sent out last night. It's called Navajo Nation CARES Act, Non-Government Entity Expenditure Plan Template. And I want to emphasize that there will be a similar template probably for government entities and enterprises, chapters, etc. But this is for non-government entities. And I want to thank the delegates for pointing out and emphasizing that this is going to have to be a collaborative effort between the persons or the organizations requesting the funds, the nation's lawyers, both DOJ, Legislative Council, the executive branch, the legislative branch, because the lawyers themselves just don't have enough information. So we can, the more information we have, the better we can respond. So I'm back with the template, and first question is the amount of funds requested. That should be, if they want $6 million, you put $6 million there. The organization requesting the funds. Who is it that wants it? Is it a nursing home organization? Is it a school? Is it you know, there's been all kinds of requests, and I don't want to reveal which ones, but you guys know. The next question is, how will funds be issued to the organization? So there's lots of different options. There's a grant agreement, which is pretty standard how Navajo does some things that gets run through OMB. There's a memorandum of agreement. There is direct funding. Of course, we've talked about this before. If you do direct funding, Navajo loses a whole lot of accountability, but it is an option. The next question is specific purposes for which the requested funds will be used. And there may be more than one purpose, but the organization needs to provide that information. It could be as simple as build windmills, or it could get much more detailed than that. And that would be, most of the time, organizations do a proposal that has a lot of details in there. And so you would attach the proposal. The next question, how will the funding respond?
You can.
What? Okay. How will the funding respond to the COVID public health emergency? DOJ's gone over that pretty much in depth and emphasized it. The funding will have to be to fund actions taken to respond to the public health emergency. That could include mitigation also. The next question, percentage of funds used for overhead administrative costs. The council's going to want to know that, the dollars are going to be going to provide services, not just to support the organization's administrative costs. And then need to know if the requested funding was included in the budget approved before March 27th, 2020. And I probably will be adding in a tribal budget in there instead of just budget. By what date will the funds be fully expended? So they've got to have a plan in place as to how those funds are going to get out not only of the Navajo Nation's door to the organization, but how the organization is going to get those funds spent by December 30th, 2020. The next question is, what challenges could prevent full expenditure of the funds by the above date? That really goes to identifying some of the answers to Delegate Smith, Delegate Stowe, actually all of the delegates. What are the challenges going to be? Council can use that info, or leadership can use that info to determine if laws need to be waived, regulations in place, things like that. Then you want the standing committee with oversight over the funded activity. You want to know what Navajo Nation Department of Program is responsible to monitor the funding. That could be OMB, or it could be actually one of the subject matter divisions. Then you have next reporting requirements applicable to the funding. That could mean the financial reports they'll need to return to the nation. Progress reports they will present to leadership. The next question is the job title of the person responsible for day-to-day administration of the funding. And very last is a board of directors resolution, or an equivalent if the organization doesn't have a board of directors. And that resolution or equivalent needs to, one, request the funds, and also it needs to affirm that the funding will only be used in compliance with Title V of the Federal Code and the Navajo Nation Terrorist Fund Act, and also that the use of the funding will comply with Navajo Nation laws and regulations. And last, that the organization will indemnify the nation for any expenditures deemed to be disallowed. I think that this is probably a template once we get it finalized, although I don't have, you can probably hand it out in draft form right now, but people need to keep in mind it hasn't been finalized. but it's a good way to put down the information that lawyers are going to need to start drafting the legislation necessary for every expenditure plan, if the council determines to do more than one expenditure plan. It also should be helpful for getting useful for the OMB and the controller's office, and then of course useful for council in being able to compare numerous expenditure plan proposals. With that, Speaker, hopefully that's a useful bit of material. Thank you. Oh, and Speaker, while I have the opportunity, there's other Office of Legislative Counsel attorneys on the line today. I understand Mariana Khan and Kristen Lowell are on. I'm not sure if there's others, but I want to take this opportunity. They have been working their proverbial tushes off for the last 2 months. And I want to express my gratitude, and I want to say that I'm very, very proud of them. Thank you, Speaker.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Thank you, Office Legislative Council staff. I don't have anybody else on right now. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Department of Justice, Mel. Always good to hear and work with you. Ms. Warner, thank you very much for being on. I don't know if you want to stay on the discussion and listen to Office of the President, Vice President, and also Chief Justice, but you're more than welcome to stay on. So is Office Legislative Council too as well. So if there's nobody else, we can move on.
Speaker, Delegate Daniel So.
Chairman So. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for allowing me the time. Ado Shanankai, members of the 24th Navajo Nation Council meeting as a committee of the whole, Naabik'íyáti, Ado Legislative Council, legislative staff, and attorneys with the Navajo Nation Department of Justice. Regarding Che Ki'alan Begay's statements in Navajo, saying that his expectations was that the nation would have met with the U.S. Treasury to basically talk about what is allowable and not and disallowable. And one of the introductory statements from one of the attorneys, could you reiterate that what the U.S. Treasury is or is not doing regarding what qualifies as a fundable, allowable expenditure or / project? I think that would clarify some of the parts of the presentation. That would be an ask. Thank you. I'll go back on mute.
Okay. I think I think Mel, you went over that, one of the slides. I know that there was a couple of slides where you explained what was not eligible and what was eligible.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Honorable Daniel So, and members of the council. I think that, Honorable So, if I'm not mistaken, are you referring to the statement that I made that governments are not required to submit proposed expenditures to Treasury for approval? I think that might be what you were referring to.
And then also the fact that the Treasury was not giving, a list of what is allowable and what is disallowable. They're just saying, I can't remember the full extent of your statement, but please, reiterate what you had originally gave in your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir, for clarifying. So in the frequently asked questions by Treasury and in the Treasury guidance, Treasury does give some examples, and they say such and such would be eligible, such and such would not be eligible, but it's not an exhaustive list. And Treasury was very intentional in deciding not to give an exhaustive list because they wanted governments, state, tribal, municipal governments, to be able for their leaders to exercise their judgment and decide what would be a necessary expenditure incurred due to COVID. And Treasury recognized that they could not imagine every single possibility for an eligible use. And so the danger of creating a list, the danger of Treasury creating a list is an exhaustive list, is if our project isn't on the list because we were very creative in thinking of something that Treasury didn't think of, then we can't do that. We can't do that project that we've thought of. And so Treasury didn't want to limit the possibilities, but they did want to give some guidance so that we would have some idea, we would have something to base our decisions on, or for leadership to base their decisions on. And so we have to continuously go back to the 3 requirements that are in the Act, and we have to continuously go back to the Treasury guidance and the Treasury frequently asked questions and see, okay, do we think this would qualify based on the 3 requirements and based on the examples, the illustrative examples that Treasury has provided? So can we make a comparison and say, well, our proposed project is very similar to a project that, or an expenditure that Treasury said would be permissible in such and such guidance. So we can make legal arguments and we can interpret, but I know that it's very frustrating to some delegates who are saying, why can't we give a list? But it's just not possible to give an exhaustive list. We can't think of everything that would be permissible and everything that would be impermissible, but we can help to interpret the Treasury guidance and the Treasury frequently asked questions. Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mel, for explaining that.
Delegate, though.
Chairman So. Chairman So.
Yes.
Go ahead.
And again, the question goes to our Legislative Council as well as Navajo Nation Department of Justice attorneys. Since Che Kealan Begay brought up legislation 0116-20, in there it talks about treating some of the citizen projects
that 116
related to water line and power lines. Could those, the intent of that legislation, would it be possible to spend the CARES Act monies for those water line and power line projects? That would be my question. I'll go back on mute.
Thank you, Speaker. This is Dana. I am going to, as I announced before, the Speaker's office has requested a legal opinion from the Attorney General of the Department of Justice on that exact question. My understanding is they have not completed that analysis, but it's imminent that we will get it. Very so with that said, I am going to turn that back to DOJ to see if they want to add.
Mr. Speaker, honorable members of the committee, thank you, Ms. Bobroff. This is Jana Werner. Yes, that opinion is in the process of being drafted, but what I want to say is the first question was whether the Sahasan projects would be considered in any way part of the existing Navajo Nation budget, because that's one of the first requirements in the Act. And I think it may be premature, but I think in general, we're leaning towards saying no, the Sahasan projects are not literally a part of the Navajo budget. So that leads to the next question of which of the Sahasan projects would otherwise be eligible for coronavirus relief funds under the terms of the Act. And that goes back to the analysis we've been talking about for the last 3 hours. Are they reasonably necessary in the reasonable judgment of leadership? Are they due to COVID emergency? Are they part of a mitigation measure necessary to address COVID, such as the CDC, water washing, and social distancing? So again, it would be this with respect to any existing Sahasan projects. It's not that all Sahasan projects could be considered, but it goes back to the case-by-case analysis using Ms. Bobroff's questionnaire. Is that a project that we can say is necessary for mitigation efforts to respond to COVID? So in a nutshell, I hope that that guidance is helpful.
Thank you, Ms. Warner. Speaker, I would like to add something directly to what Chairman Stowe asked about legislation 0116-20. I just went back and pulled up the legislation just to make sure my memory was accurate. But that legislation does not authorize the president directly to use the CSN funds for water line, electricity, those types of projects. Those would, as a matter of fact, I don't believe the legislation uses the word CSN anywhere. So what the provision actually says, as allowed by the Coronavirus Relief Fund and U.S. Treasury guidelines and/or Navajo agreements with the federal government, the president may incorporate water line, electricity, telecommunication projects, and other infrastructure projects into the expenditure plan using the, what here it says, $550 million, and implement and construct such eligible projects under the authority of the Navajo Nation CARES Fund Act. So it does, it's a statement in the legislation that allows the president to incorporate those types of projects and maybe CSN projects into the expenditure plan. It's my belief that Council has the same authority. So thank you, Speaker.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Barbara, Ms. Warner, for that discussion. Moving on down, there was individuals that were talking over each other. I don't know who was wanting to speak, but the only one I could make up was Honorable Otto So.
Thank you very much, Speaker. What I would like to indicate is that the other is housing. The concept of housing. How can we, what could be utilized for the justification for housing? We know that on Navajo, we have many families, multiple families living in one household. As they live in one household, if a person comes back not knowing he or she contracted the virus, coronavirus, he or she infected their whole family there, maybe 15 or so. So what I'm getting to is that we need to at the housing aspect. What could we? How could we use these dollars to help with housing? And we need to make sure that we are within these parameters. And housing is one way to spend money. I know we can't get a huge workforce to build homes across the nation, but if we look at other alternatives to buy mobile homes for families that have that are in that scenario of living in one household, multiple families living in one household, by looking at the track of Navajo people who have existing home site leases, and I believe those we could buy mobile homes from neighboring mobile home builders and provide homes and provide that to try to defeat the purpose of coronavirus. Get more people into their own living space environment. So those are ways that we need to think outside the box. The other is, Mr. Speaker, is that along with this, I hope that that the controller is looking at an outside entity. I would really like a Navajo firm to help her with the control of these dollars and the auditing of these dollars, so that we could dot our I's and cross our T's to make sure that we spend these dollars accordingly to what Congress has put in place. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Otto. So that I don't have anybody else on the line.
Speaker, Kealan again.
Honorable Kealan Begay.
Another area that I like for the Speaker's office, I think there needs to be a response back to the community of all the comments that they've made. Kidnans in the Gito, you stand up the fitness, not the big not socialisha. It are a chito, it's a chatoba, this Tanigo, not Chosikin, Hichopatatia. There were resolutions, chapter resolutions, it's a forward to Tatia. A cook for the Tobago to know at the end of the we're giving the Navajo people that we haven't even read one of their comments yet. I could go others and any Nisha. I could detour you. The Nana kids ate up on that Zada. Don't hit it. That cut. I could have let the road hot that to better house and the under Ecuador the Nanziniki. Shut it up and sing case for don't need a yard and they got all the Nanziniki beside the keys. Not so sick is that. That it is either but it's not. They asked the snap with that age because you're at the end of the years, you don't have to the case go. Kodo, I let the Nanziniki be the China. Oto, I also know as that page, yes, to be as on the need of the hot, the Nigo. then ziniki on the nas ko ota is ako ebe na chuko no speaker. We need to set aside a time, even from the radio, probably that we need to respond back to the community of their comments that they made. So it could not by request card on the speaker. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Honorable Kiambi, for that recommendation. We Speaker's office is actually working on that, working with that. We've been on the agency calls, thanking them. And most importantly, we are requesting to get that information out in the paper this week, the Navajo Times. And we have to get on the radio, we can do that too as well. Again, thank you for that recommendation, Honorable Kiambi. Madam Chair Charles Newman, floor is yours.
Speaker. Thank you for saying that. My colleagues, thank you for being on the line. Really quickly, Speaker, I think that it really is important that people understand what the parameters are for spending this money, as already stated by Delegate Kialambi. We need to get that information out to the people right away through radio. You mentioned Navajo Times. But I think it needs to, I think we need to probably even get maybe a video out there that could be shared on Facebook that explains what, I guess really just what the big issues are as far as spending, because I think our Navajo people really think that the $600 million is just open for spending. And the more information we get out there to our people, the better it would be. And it would also help with them understanding that these are not parameters that council has put in place, but these are, from the federal government. And this is what we have to work with. I think that the more they know and the more they understand that, this is not free money and it can just be spent on anything and everything COVID-19 related, I think it's going to put us probably in a better situation. I'm sorry, I was in line. It's going to put us in a better situation to answer questions, and then also those resolutions that have gone, that are not resolutions, the resolutions and the comments that have been provided for the legislation. It will help us in, I guess, explaining why certain voices had, not that they were ignored, but why they were not considered. So again, I really think our Navajo people are audio and visual. So if we could create a video on this, explaining, like I said, what we've learned today, then that would be great. Thank you.
Speaker.
Thank you very much. Thank you again for that, those recommendations. Any more questions for Department of Justice or Office of Legislative Counsel?
Delegate Daniel So.
Chairman So, go ahead.
Yes, it's not a question to OLC or Department of Justice, but just the fact that what Brother Otto So made reference to, is there a chance that we could get a report from each of the enterprises, NHA, NECA, NAPI, about how much money they received through the CARES Act? We also did some legislation to help Diné College, NTU, and I think the gaming enterprise, and even let's say, I don't know if the Native Navajo Arts and Crafts Enterprise, NACE, even applied for it. So if we could get a, I guess, a report about how much they received and what their intent and purposes for the monies that they receive. If we could get that onto a spreadsheet, I think that would really help us also regarding perhaps not to double fund some of their work already in progress. That would be my request of your office, Mr. Speaker, and to basically put it on record that we do need those information. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Daniel So, Chairman So. We can get that information. I have Chief of Staff just notified her. She will be drafting that, and we will be sending that a memo out to all our enterprises today. Okay, with that, any other comments, questions? There are none. Thank you very much again, Ms. Warner and the staff there for bringing on the areas of interest and colleagues. Mr. Rodas seems like he's one of our experts on our internal team regarding eligible and non-eligible. The parameters of what can and cannot be spent, these fundings cannot be spent. Working together with our Office of Legislative Counsel, Ms. Barbroff and her team, I honestly believe that we can make almost a justification for anything that we are looking at in order to make sure that we can expend these dollars. So thank you, Mel, for that explanation moving forward. So with that, without further ado, moving on down on the agenda, colleagues. We have Office of the President and Vice President. We reached out. Is anybody from OPVP wanting to present on recommendations for legislation 115-20 or resolution CMY-44-20? Anybody from OPVP? Going once, going twice, going 3 times. Colleagues, as indicated at the discussion on Monday and also discussion from recommendation, we did say that we were going to reach out to the president's office to hear their recommendations, and that's the reason why we're here today. Moving on down then, Madam Chief Justice, the team online, I know that you guys were ready to have a presentation ready.
Good afternoon, Miate. This is Stephen at City. I'm the Administrative Director of the Courts for the Navajo Nation Judicial Branch. Myself and the Peacemaking Program Coordinator, Manager, Mr. Roman Bitsui, will be ready to have a presentation ready. Yeah, we're here to provide information and tell you where the judicial branch is at the CARES and our responses and the development that we're doing right now, pursuant to the guidance that everybody was briefed on this morning. The judicial branch has been responding to our public health emergency since the beginning of May, when the first executive orders were being issued by the president and the Emergency Management Commission. And we started meeting at the beginning of March, started to get our heads around the situation, and by the end of March, we had developed a continuity of operations plan. In that plan, we highlighted the importance of complying with the requirements, the public health guidance, and the requirements for sheltering in place, and the evolving guidance on mitigating the community spread of the coronavirus. In that regard, many of our initial administrative orders that were issued directing our operations for the judicial branch focused on telecommuting and getting many of our operations supported by staff normally who would work inside our buildings, supported by essential staff that would now be working from remote access points, namely their homes. And so we realized in March, and as we started to implement our continuity of operations plan, the primary goal is to keep our personnel safe, and for the public that still has a need to access the judicial branch, courts and court-related services and functions, that we try to do our best to minimize the risks that the public faces coming to interact with the courts. And our goal is, at that point, was to get to 95 to 100% telecommuting and abiding by all of the public health guidance for social distancing and sheltering in place, and everything that we learned about how to mitigate or contain community spread of this virus. And we've been working on that for 2 months now, and we're at a point where we are providing essential services. The judicial branch did not completely cease operations. We've been scaling back the operations of the courts to focus on 8 essential areas for cases where we have statutory obligations and responsibilities to hear required cases, and then also all of the emergency provisions that people are requesting for protection orders. And then now we see the emerging caseload from some of the emergency actions that are taken by the Navajo Nation government for quarantine orders, or for most recently the curfew enforcement that is happening across our Navajo Nation, all in an effort to again mitigate and contain the spread of this virus amongst our communities and our people. And so our goal, it has been reinforced by what is happening. We see the increasing caseload. We see the increasing identification of COVID positive cases. We know that we're not yet at a peak, and we understand we're following the best information that our own Navajo Nation Department of Health and the Epidemiology Center can provide. And so our initial time frame that we were operating from was a 90-day perspective. We know that we're now beyond that initial 90-day period, and we're looking at all the available information coming out that this is a situation that is going to last essentially until an effective, safe, and available vaccine for this virus is out for everybody in the United States to access. So this is forcing our judicial branch to continue to follow our initial goal of telecommuting, and we have about a good month and a half now of working out many of the issues for what it means to work away from our judicial facilities, what it takes to continue to provide access to our courts and to conduct hearings from either a telecommuting or teleconference base or video conference base. And a lot of these requirements come back to the need for the equipment to operate from a telecommuting basis. And we realize that many of these needs, and especially for getting people the tools so that they can work from their homes, they weren't in our budget really. It's not something we regularly budget for. We don't have telecommuting, a regular opportunity for our personnel to use as another method of regular work. So all of these things are unforeseen, but we had used some of the funds that were available in our budget initially to try and get some of the tools in our people's hands so that they can continue to provide these essential services. We've now reassessed, and we have taken a review of these needs, and that's where we're concentrating the development of our funding proposal in light of the CARES Act. The judicial branch was able to get a copy of the guidance information from the United States Treasury, both the congressional record, the information that you have in your packet, as well as the thing that's labeled Exhibit B, which is the April 22nd, 2020 guidance that the U.S. Treasury distributed for all governments, including tribal governments. And we've been using that to inform the development of our needs requests and the things that we would hopefully be able to use CARES Act funding for. We have had a chance to have a initial discussion with our oversight committee, the Law and Order Committee. We did that on May 12th, and then we were invited to have a similar report and discussion with members of the Resource and Development Committee. So we shared at that point a week ago where we were at in our thinking planning back and our operations in general, how we're conducting the operations of the judicial branch. We see the opportunity of the CARES Act as a great potential relief to help us continue to provide the necessary services. We didn't have many of these expenditures that we're now incurring planned in our budget, and we understand some of the language that's in the guidance, and we certainly understand the time frame aspect of needing to expend any funds that we are going to be receiving by December 30th. And so we're very cognizant of the three essential criteria that the United States Treasury has put out for the Navajo Nation. And so what we're focusing on is continuing to support the judicial branch's ability to respond during this public health emergency and during this COVID-19 pandemic. We're going to be looking at increasing the judicial branch's ability to do our part to address the public health needs, we're going to be looking at ways that we can continue to operate as we are doing now, all in an effort to mitigate the public health conditions. We have identified certain areas where this funding could be applied, and we are developing our budgets for eventual submission once we understand what the processes will be. We are looking primarily at the needs for keeping our workforce safe and the responsibilities that we're going to have for the public that needs to use the court services and court-related services. As you know, we have 13 district courts and a circuit court, and we also have the peacemaking program, and we have probation and parole services, and they all are highly interactive with with the people and the public that have cases and need to access our courts, our judges, our court staff, the peacemaking program staff, as well as the probation and parole services staff. All of our people that come to the courts usually conduct their business in a face-to-face, in-person presence. We've closed all of our buildings to the public, and we're trying to continue to serve the public through indirect, non-face-to-face manners, and that has highlighted the need for all kinds of communication and IT support in a way that was never contemplated or completely unforeseen in our budget for 2020. And everything that we're doing at this point is, we would argue that we're doing this to help mitigate and contain the spread of the virus. So the one thing that we wanted to also impart to our delegates here is that we, as the judicial branch, are separate and a co-equal branch of the Navajo Nation government. And it's important for everybody to understand that it's critical for the branch to uphold this concept and this practice of judicial independence. And this extends to our judges and justices and all people who help operate the courts. We continue to be fair and impartial, and in this regard, we take the necessary cautions when it comes to taking positions and issues that are being considered by the Navajo Nation leadership. So we are primarily in place to the core of our mission to resolve disputes and restore harmony and to guard against any appearance of impropriety. So when it comes to commenting on proposed legislation, we tread very carefully, but we wanted to offer that we do indeed have identified some areas of impact from COVID-19 pandemic where we see the branch needing to access funds from the CARE Act, and that we would then be putting forth the information in budget form and justifications to demonstrate how the judicial branch has taken into account all of the important criteria and factors, so that you can see that all of our requests or how we might be able to use CARES Act will be done in a responsible and cognizant manner, taking into account all of the criteria and the conditions, and the primary goal of maximizing the use of these funds for the benefit of our people and consistent with the statutory and fundamental law obligations that rest on the judicial branch. We know that courts cannot close. The courts cannot close even during this pandemic, and you see that across the country. Most of our neighboring jurisdictions, all judicial systems are scaled back to essential services. They still remain available for the hearings and the cases and resolving disputes. And the Navajo Nation Judicial Branch is no different. We have to continue to meet the needs and provide the services to our communities. And even though the threat and the reality of COVID-19 has greatly disrupted a lot of events and a lot of systems within the nation, including traditional services and traditional delivery of court services, we see that our ability to access the CARES funding and any other resources provided by the federal government will help cover these unforeseen costs and help us to transition to, I guess, what people are calling, quote, a new normal or revised platforms on how to operate until we do find a way successfully through this pandemic and get to the end where we have vaccines and protections against this new novel virus. I would just remind the delegates and again highlight the fact that we had support initially from the Law and Order Committee in mid-March when we developed initial budget request for supplemental funding from the UUSB, and we wanted to begin moving to remote operations. That bill, which was, I believe, 0080-20, was passed by the council, and we appreciated that support. You saw our need, and you provided us the assistance. That piece of legislation was vetoed by the president at that time. But since then, we've continued to take a look at our needs, and they have definitely grown. The initial requests that we provided were just for the beginnings of the equipment and the tools and devices that were necessary, that we felt and we saw at that time were necessary to get our people to help mitigate this community spread of the virus by having the ability to work at home. And we now have reviewed time and time again what those needs are. We've expanded the scope of those needs to include our judicial partners. We do not work in a vacuum. We have partnerships with offices and programs in the executive branch, such as the prosecutor's office, public defenders, Division of Social Services, and our partners in the Department of Information and Technology. Much of the core of the judicial branch is case management for supporting all of our courts and all of the activities of officers of the courts, is housed in equipment that is overseen, maintained, and supervised by the combination of a partnership between the Department of Department of Information Technology and our own Judicial Branch Information Technology office. And we have kept this partnership at the forefront as we evolved into our continuity of operations plan. And it's really at the core of everything we're doing in terms of being able to work from a remote basis. Our case management system is provided by an outside vendor who's been able to maintain services for us, and we're grateful for that. But we have an internal team that continues to make sure that those data systems are accessible to all our courts and to all our judicial partners. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done to make sure that access is reliable on a daily basis. for our essential services levels. And we're going to, at some point, have to consider and plan for a expansion of our services because, we are now at 2 months fully into essential services, and we're starting to see the backload of cases in all our courts, and we need to be able to come to a point where we will have to put more cases on our plate to address because we can't just keep delaying and continuing cases to a point in the future. We're going to have to find a way to safely protect our people and safely protect the public, at the same time begin evolving from a retraction to essential services to providing more and more services to our people. And so that's going to require a little bit more investment in not only IT infrastructure, but also perhaps even some major modifications, minor modifications, our internal workspaces so that our staff can maintain social distancing. And we're going to have to look at each of our facilities and see what those facilities' needs are so that we can continue to provide those. We also know that the federal guidelines on return to work and how to maintain safe public workspaces is always evolving. I believe there's been recent revisions to regulations or guidance issued by the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, as well as the CDC and the U.S. EPA that we continue to track. And that goes for even cleaning and disinfecting for our facilities. So all of these things are generating a variety of new costs that were never contemplated in our original budgets. As was discussed earlier, when it comes to supplies, we are continually assessing the need for maintaining inventories of cleaning supplies and our own PPE and other devices that help us when we have to accept materials from outside the office, either in filings or pleadings being hand-delivered. We have drop boxes at all of our districts now that receive these information. We continue to process them, but we continue to have a need for a reliable and accessible supply of PPE for the essential staff that are going to be handling all of these documents. And we need to be able to make sure that the cleaning products are there for our facilities, especially if we're going to be looking at opening up the buildings at some point in the future. We're not quite there yet, but we do see that all across the United States, there's a big debate on reopening of many different facets of activity in communities, from restaurants to courts to other businesses and government offices. So we're trying to keep up with all of that evolving information, and all of it is going to require more resources than we initially had in our FY 2020 budget. And you'll be informed at a point in the near future. We have draft budgets that we're continuing to review and update, which will highlight these needs and where we need continued support for the judicial branch to continue to operate under these pandemic circumstances. At this point, I wanted to just ask Mr. Roman Batsui from the Peacemaking Program to provide a little bit of background on some of the planning and thinking that we've been exploring and using and highlight some of the points that the judicial branch has in its decision-making processes for budgeting in general, and then how we're looking at the opportunity to use these resources that are specifically being provided under the CARES Act for COVID-19 purposes. Shanella, Mr. Mitsui.
Oh, yeah, Shanella. I don't not on Nabi committee. Because oh yeah, that's so that it is what they sleep. We have been working on different projects, and we have been meeting within the judicial branch on a weekly basis. We provide updates to one another with all the districts and the judges. I know that there's some committees that are established within the judicial branch that talks about the various aspects of the funding that is made available. Okay, one of them is the matrix committee. And so we came up with a matrix. We call it CARES Act Project Selection Matrix. And this is basically to look at all the requests that are coming in from the districts and the programs, and that to come out with a scoring and a priority. And there are 5 categories that we came up with. And under the 5 categories, there are several issues, anywhere from 1 to 4 questions. The first one is the CARES Act eligibility. Under that, the first one is, does the project or activity improve the Navajo Nation's response to the health crisis caused by COVID-19, or our ability to provide essential services impacted by the crisis? And we give example under that. One of them is that the eligibility, and some of that was covered by the Department of Justice and also by the contract attorney in their PowerPoint presentation to you this morning. The eligibility, payroll and expenses for public safety and health workers, and for staff who are substantially dedicated to responding to the emergency. Infrastructures and equipment to provide new internet access necessary to provide services while offices are closed. Facilities necessary to allow for social distancing. Cost of sanitizing, PPE, etc. Cost of other equipment that would make it physically, for personnel to physically visit clients who are required to stay home. That's the first question. And then the second one is that, can this be demonstrated by a clear argument that the activity solves a problem that is contributing to or caused by the crisis? And the third one is the expense eligible under the Act. Can the activity or capital purchase be complete no later than December 30, 2020? That's under the CARES Act eligibility, under number 1. That's the guiding principle. The second guiding principle is the mission advancements. There are 2 questions. One is, will the expenditure serve medical, educational, subsistence, or services needs for people who have no other resources who meet these needs? An example is pay for judicial or other branch program services, provide food or medical supplies, pay for cost of delivering emergency supplies. And the second question is, will the expenditure pay for facilities, equipment, staffing, or other capacity that will allow the judicial branch to fulfill its mission? The third guiding principle, or the guidance, is economic efficiency. Does the activity maximize the benefit of the dollars being spent by addressing multiple needs or creating new opportunities while solving COVID-19 problem? Example is provide internet access that serves judicial branch services and programs as well as education, telemedicine, and work from home needs. The fourth guiding principle is economic necessity. Is the expenditure something that could be funded with other sources? Is the money being used efficiently because CARES Act is the only source of funds? And the last one is relative priority compared to other eligible activities. Is the activity a high priority for the health and safety and well-being of the Navajo people compared to other activities? And the example is, does the activity provide critical material, staffing, or services that help people in more than one chapter? Is it a need that has been long recognized as essential services that have been interrupted by COVID-19 or made it unavailable because of COVID-19? And the second question is, does a project or activity have demonstrated support from community and legislative stakeholders? And under that matrix, there is a project name description, there's a criteria, the 5 principles that I indicated with A, B, C, D, or A, B, and so forth, and the project ranking. And then there's a score that will be attached to it, and then the priority of a recommendation. So they all different proposals that are coming in from the districts and programs. Does it meet the eligibility criteria, the criteria that is being established by the Treasury Department? Aron that yakon Hanza Kishin ya a base of Gichidon Ilto be Chidon Ilgit Oyo and has it and Linkijo Quaki 8 Arquigoshin Shinto and Tanaha case than little little call. Date or at all Nikilchin Ado Licto at Nakashide Gota Nahabaka Ado Licto here, Kuroshi Smotan Kunzaho. Here.
Members of the Naabik'íyáti committee, I just wanted to wrap up our part of the discussion by simply reminding everybody that within the judicial branch, there are several important tenets that we abide by when it comes to administration and the planning of budgets and the expenditure of the people's money, public funds. It's very clear within our agency or within our branch and across all of our districts, all our business unit managers, that the use and expenditure of public funds by the judicial branch, our employees and our programs must be appropriate and subject to public view. And in that regard, we definitely promote and encourage transparency when it comes to public funds. We also acknowledge as appropriators, you understand the fiduciary responsibilities. We also take that upon ourselves within the judicial branch as well. and it's been issued in Supreme Court decisions that all public officials for the Navajo Nation, within the Navajo Nation, have a fiduciary responsibility to the Navajo people to execute the trust that the people have placed within them in the administration of our government. So it's our duty to not breach the trust of the Navajo people, and those are the things that we are maintaining and including as we think through the entire opportunity that the CARES Act presents to us. I guess the other thing is we're certainly aware of the need for oversight from entities such as the Office of Inspector General from the federal side, and we're well aware of the time frame that we have to use at least this first portion of the CARES Act that's been allocated to the Navajo Nation. I know many of you are probably interested in seeing some of these documents that we are developing. They're still in draft form. They're still open and in a deliberative process, and they're not quite ready, haven't been finalized by our offices, but we will get those to you at a point probably in the next couple of days or by the end of the week. We did have a meeting scheduled before this invitation came up before us yesterday to sit with you this morning and this afternoon. We did have a meeting scheduled to finalize what Roman had just presented verbally, and that document is still needing to be deliberated upon and discussed amongst our administrative leadership, and then also with our Chief Justice and our judiciary. So if you would just accept my apologies for not being able to provide that for you for this discussion today. We will get that to you when we're ready to release it, and that should be within a couple of days. And also the same with our budgets. As I mentioned, we started initially at the very beginning of this pandemic in early March, developing our needs assessments, and the amount that we initially asked for was a modest $103,000 amount, which was supported by the council at that time, but vetoed by the president. Our budgets that we're contemplating now that we have the CARES Act opportunity are starting to range from a total that could be in the $5 million to $10 million range. And this would be primarily for expanding our telecommuting basis, and to take a look at how we're going to be planning for what I can just generally call a reopening of our courts. At some point, we're going to have to begin moving beyond essential services. And even though we may still be operating from a telecommuting basis, we're going to have to be able to put more on our plate. And the challenge in doing that will be making sure that our personnel remain safe, and that we have provisions and ability to support our personnel should they come in contact with COVID-19. And the other part of that challenge is to continue to keep the public that needs to access our courts safe, as well as they interface with the court system as they become court involved through these processes. We don't want to be forcing people to have to leave the safety of their home unnecessarily, and it's a really big challenge to make and help our people become aware of access to court systems remotely. And we know that many of our people don't have stable and regular access to the internet, to our Navajo Nation information systems. And so in that regard, we see a need not only for our own internal IT infrastructure, but we want to continue to work with our partners in the judicial system, in the executive branch, for for instance, the Department of Information Technology, to continue to make the improvements across the Navajo Nation government in terms of the information technology infrastructure that will, as Roman said, help not only the judicial branch, but the entire Navajo Nation government. And of course, these things would also benefit our people. So don't want to get prescriptive in any way, but we definitely see a big need to invest some of these resources in the improvements of our information technology infrastructure and our systems to help our judicial branch programs continue to do its mission and keep people safe from this virus until we finally get to an endpoint where people can get a vaccination and be safe based on the science and the medicine. The medical conditions are such that we're beyond this current pandemic. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you for that information. The staff there from the judicial branch, and we look forward to that those documents, because that's what is going to be needed in the discussion when delegates start putting together the expenditure plan. And this is a discussion. I know that numerous delegates, including myself, support the judicial branch and making sure that they get the adequate supplies and equipment that they need. But the sooner the better we get that information, the better that we can move forward and try to identify what is the real need there and what we need to do in order for us to make sure that you guys get your quality, not only quality supplies, but equitable supplies too as well, for not your employees, to keep them safe, but also for individuals in our systems and our correctional system, and all your first responders out there, and most importantly, the public that comes in to utilize your facilities. Those are the initiatives that we need to know, making sure that we can relatively keep our people safe and moving forward over the next year. With that, colleagues, I don't know if there's any questions right now. If there's any questions, we can. If not, we can make sure that the most important thing is follow up from the judicial branch, and they can present, unveil their plan. I was hoping we could get some kind of a budget today, but apparently we didn't get that. So, any questions, comments?
Speaker, this is Delegate Charles Newton.
Madam Chair, go ahead.
Yeah, Satilla, Otto, Stephen, thank you for your presentation. And I just want to say that we will continue to work for you, and we look forward to working with you. We appreciate the information that you have provided for us today. And I do want to say that, colleagues, it's sad that our third branch of government is having to have these type of issues. And what really is frustrating is we are not taking care of the judicial branch. They are obviously they're in need of equipment upgrades, things to be able to work from home. And I hope that I know that colleagues, I know that you all have supported the judicial branch. We all voted in favor for giving them more money. Unfortunately, it was vetoed. And I want to say that I think the judicial branch is in a very, very tough predicament because they have to be unbiased, because they have to present themselves in that manner. It makes it difficult for them to try to have to advocate for funding. What I've often wondered, and what I continue to research, is why the judicial branch is under the oversight of Law and Order Committee. If they are a third branch of government, why the judicial branch has to report to council and why they have to ask for money. I have been doing some research at the federal level as far as how the structure is when it comes to budget. The Supreme Court never goes before the legislative branch, only for confirmation. They don't go before the legislative branch to ask for money. It's automatic. What makes it really hard for me to try to understand is the fact that there's a 3-branch agreement. This agreement is done before any of our departments and divisions have the opportunity to say what it is that they need. So I don't understand that part as well. And we're going into our second cycle of budget with our budget season coming up. And maybe somebody can explain to me why that works that way. I would assume that the 3-branch agreement would come after the divisions and departments come before the oversight to ask for money. Even with that, the judicial branch having to come before law and order committee to have to justify what it is that they need from us. I'm having a difficult time understanding that. And yes, maybe once I figure that out, maybe legislation will be coming forward to completely separate the judicial branch from the legislative branch. It's like, I guess my question is the president subject to an oversight? We know his executive divisions and departments are, his directors are, but is the president and his office subject to an oversight? And does he have to ask for money? Or is this an agreement that's made among the 3-branch chiefs? So with that, I just want to say that, colleagues, I thank you for your continued support. I know that we all support the judicial branch. We all know how important they are to our government. And I hope that we can continue to work together to give them what it is that they need. When they came before us at budget season last year, some of their equipment was around 6 or 7 years old. Most computers are built to last 5 years, and then they reach their end of life cycle. Their computers have been updated. They have been almost rebuilt to try to accommodate their needs. So again, colleagues, I look forward to your support, and I hope that we can help the judicial branch with their needs, and then also bring them up to the same level that legislative and executive branch are at. Thank you.
Hey, thank you for those comments, Madam Chair. Any other comments, questions right now for the judicial branch? There's none. Thank you very much, Stephen, and your staff, and tell Madam Chief Justice, thank you. Look forward to hearing from her. When you are ready, let either Chief of Staff Lashana So know, or I guess just her, just so that we can get you back on and make sure that you guys are presenting the numbers that you're needing before Naabik'íyáti committee. Other than that, I don't have anybody else on the line. That has concluded our discussion for today. Colleagues, tomorrow we will be having a very healthy debate or presentation from IHS, who has confirmed on water infrastructure projects. So has Jason John from the Water Resource Department. So has Rex Kuntz and Mr. Haas from NTUA. And so has individuals, Mr. Howe and his organization, who are organizing the Western Pipeline Project. Those recommendations for some of the shortfalls are in there too as well, because I heard that those were some concerns from some of my colleagues. So we will have a very good overview and presentation on what is needed within the Navajo Nation regarding water infrastructure tomorrow, colleagues. So without further ado, I don't have anybody else. Again, any last comments, colleagues? Going once, going twice. 3
Real quick,
times.
Speaker?
Yes.
Yeah, this is Delegate Halona. I just, real quick comment on with the judicial system there. It seems like they got quite a ways already working on some of these projects, and I just want to thank them for their input. Be looking forward to the report in writing, because a lot of that we could use in some of the justifications that we need to get started with also. So thank you very much, judicial system, and I appreciate the report. It was really interesting, and I know you did. Sounds like you did a lot of work on there. I just want to say thank you very much. That's all I have to say. Thank you, Speaker.
All right. Thank you, colleagues, again for calling in today. Thank you to the judicial branch for your presentation. Thank you to Department of Justice and colleagues. If you have any questions about inallowable costs, Mr. Mel Rodas has indicated he's available at any time. Officer Ms. Dana Barbroff has indicated, and Ms. Warner is always available. I know she is, to answer any of your questions. So thank you to all 3 of you from Office Legislative Council, Office Legislative Services, and Department of Justice. Thank you to the staff, our Mayor, Ms. Marion Khan, and Ms. Lowell too as well for being on the line. Yeah. So we are closing the meeting here now. The time now is 12:56 p.m. Thank you. We will start up tomorrow at a work session at 9 a.m. First one on the agenda is IHS colleagues at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. Have a good day. Have a good Thursday.
Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Speaker.